Irrigation System conditional use permit filed by Expedition Wind. First off, roll call. Dwight Fleming.
Here.
Glenn Thiessen.
Here.
Brad Banneker.
Here.
Derek Belton is here. Dwayne Bear.
Here.
William Kropa.
Here.
Jim Schmidt.
Here.
Mel Fleming has recused himself. Kathy Enlow is absent. Our administrator, Sharon Olmstead.
Here.
Recording secretary, Brandon Meyerhoff.
Here.
Consultant, Russ Avey.
Here.
And our legal counsel, Pat Hughes. At this time, does any member have any conflict of interest or any statement they'd like to make?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a statement that it showed that I had signed a petition so prior to these proceedings, so I'm probably going to recuse myself from the vote.
Thank you, Brad. At this point, we will ask the applicant to come up for their rebuttal.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, staff, support, thank you for your patience and working through the first two meetings and now this meeting. Want to just kind of walk through an agenda of what we'd like to see get done in terms of this meeting. First and foremost, I think we need to review the comments that were made at the public hearing. And unfortunately, we're not going to review any of the positive comments, but we do think you need to hear our response to those issues that were raised by the opponents of the project. And we've got a number of those that we're going to talk about directly. And immediately when we get done, we would like to ask your opinion, make sure that we've addressed any issues that you noted during the public hearing, and if we can provide additional amplification, we do that. Assuming that we get through all of that, we'd like to move on to presenting Expedition's conditions, precedents, standards for what would be the prospective approval of the CUP. We would ask your consideration of the development plan, which is the integrated CUPs and our new one. And at that stage, we would, I think, turn the meeting over to the commission, and for your discussion, we'd certainly be available.
I get started then. They wanted you to have these just while you're listening to their comments. So in addition to the map provided, this is the informational packet with their copy of factors. And then also after it is a copy of the PowerPoint that he's taking.
Yeah, you'll have a full set of our PowerPoint as a reference point for you as we move through the discussion.
Have it in writing. And so this packet has the questions presented, the how the project falls in to the set of factors. And then later, like this mentioned, proposed conditions.
First, in summary of the public hearing, we recorded 64 total speakers at the hearing. Of that group, 26 spoke in favor of the project, 18 of which have a leasehold improvement or leasehold interest in the project with Expedition Wind. And there were 8 favorable comments that were not involved directly in the project. We counted 36 people that spoke in general opposition to the project. We believe that's correct. We thought the speakers by itself would be an interesting review as we got started. You probably can't see it real well on the map, but this is obviously our footprint and the immediate area. The blue dots are expedition speakers, and the red dots are opposition speakers. And if you look at this map, you'll see that 10, I look at that number right, please, 10? Oh, excuse me, it's 12, I can't read my own writing. 12 of the speakers were from expedition, and 22 were opponents of the project. But if you could note that at least 12 of those speakers, of the 22, were at least 2 miles from the footprint, 2 miles or greater from the footprint, according to our records. We're happy to discuss that with anybody, but that was our observation. As a reference point, we also wanted to summarize the issues we're going to be talking about so that you kind of get a sense. And then we can go through this fairly quickly, but I think this becomes kind of a good list, something for you to work off of in terms of the roughly 28 to 30 issues that were raised, and we want to at least address in some form. We broke it into 3 different categories: industry issues, the issue of bats and birds, songbirds, etc., land lease structures and neighboring property rights, aerial spraying, and that we tied that in with the GPS systems that may be affected by turbines, property valuation, which would be the prospective changes in home value. Those we classified as kind of industry issues. It's not me. There were a few financial issues that were going to be addressed. Number one, landowner lease payments. How are our leases structured and how do they compare with the Diamond Vista project? Talk a little bit about real estate payments and the pilot payments, tax credits, and then I think there was a question about the financial capability and commitment. I think they're speaking about ours and Aries together. And so our owner accountability on a long-term basis. And then the last were the project local issues, which I think were probably the most numerous. And if you do see a number after the issue, it was raised by that many different people during the course of their presentation. But environmental issues, electromagnetic interference, the makeup of the footprint, setbacks and how that works, decommissioning, expedition, how we set up our CUPs, and then finally I think it was the local decision-making process. In other words, what was the prospect of a county-wide vote? I think that was requested by 3 different people. So I'm going to kind of start off some of these primary issues and start, I think, first with the real estate valuation analysis. We had 5 people raise this issue, so we understand the prospective influence and importance of it. But please note that in our review, only 10 or less of the public hearing opponent speakers were within 2 miles of the turbine. So I think that plays a little bit of influence in terms of the depth of that issue. If you recall, there were a number of people came up with their own information on how adjacent property owner landowner values are reduced after a wind turbine project is built. We didn't get to see all of the data, but that data that we did see, and as we acknowledged, most of that was provided by specific individual real estate specialists. They were not necessarily studies. There have been a number of studies over the past 10 years. And I think we pointed to what we believe are the most valid studies, and particularly as they relate to the Expedition project by focusing on what's going on in Kansas. But the Center of Rural Affairs published probably the most comprehensive study with over 50,000 homes. They cited 1,100 sales within a mile of a turbine and 330 sales within a half mile. It represented 9 different states and 27 different counties, so probably one of the largest studies that's ever been done nationally. Their valuation, and they admitted that in the first 2 years of a project, when it's under construction and there's a lot of new things happening, there is some variation in the market. But after they get through that first 2 years, they find that the values are not significantly different from what they were before or other similar type values. We found 2 good representations in Kansas. There was a 2014 study by the state of Kansas on wind farms in Kansas. And they studied property valuation in the Mendota Hills, Lee Wind Farm, and the DeKalb Wind Center farms. And again, reached a similar position in terms of no significant drop in value, particularly after the first 2 years. And then as we pointed to, and we think this is probably the most interesting local information that you could ask for, if you're a property owner and you get your bill every year, it's based on a certain valuation. The best way that you can save money is to push that valuation down. That's why we found it interesting when the Reno County appraiser contacted all 24 counties that have wind farms in them in the state of Kansas. 23 of them got back their information to the appraiser. And going all the way back to 2001, those 23 local appraisers reported that none had lowered any property valuations adjacent to their local wind farms. So when there's a motivation to drop your taxes, and it hasn't occurred once in 23 wind farms, that seemed like pretty good evidence. There were a couple comments that the local economics are not that significant. We're not going to spend a lot of time. We've got Preston here. You're welcome to ask him some questions. I think the model that he uses is a very good one. It's got national acclaim and credibility behind it. And I just point to the fact that if our economic impact over 30 years is $143 million, we can be off by an awful lot and still have this pretty worthwhile project. So we've just kind of reprinted those numbers for you. I want to talk just a moment about lease payments, because there is a difference between how we calculate lease payments, Expedition, and how Diamond Vista does it. Diamond Vista is a turbine-focused model. They pay somewhere in the neighborhood of about $15,000 per turbine. And if you are a landowner but have no turbine, you do get a land payment. But if you have a turbine, you don't get a land payment. And their land payments are less than our land payments. We've used this model since we got started. We break the actual revenue into 2 relatively equal pieces. One of those pieces goes to compensate the turbines. The other piece goes to compensate every acre that's in the footprint. So if I have a piece of property and I have 2 turbines on it and 240 acres, I get paid for those 2 turbines and the 240 acres. That seems to be a more equitable way to distribute the income that comes off the projects. The other interesting thing is that we increase our payments every 10 years by about 20%. It's a relationship with how much revenue the project is generating. Let's call it 5.5% roughly. So we're going to continue that split, half to turbines, half to land, all the way through the projects, and then give you 3 raises in the first 30 years. And those raises become pretty significant. We've compared our gross numbers against similar numbers of what's been used up at Diamond Vista. We think we're pretty close to being comparable on a long-term present value basis. I say that too, that our landowners have gotten comfortable with it. They do like the idea that they know they'll get a payment every year, especially given the fact that we're paying for both sides. Side by side with the issue of land payments is decommissioning. And our landowner, and this, decommissioning is an issue for first our landowners and for the county, and we understand it. Our lease provides a 12-month time period to remove turbines if they're not spinning. The landowner has the right to have that turbine removed and send us the bill. The landowner then can retain that salvage value. We post a bond on the front end, and after 15 years, we post a very significant bond, and that comes into play in the decommissioning agreement with the county.
Can you speak to when that decommissioning agreement is
Well, the decommissioning
negotiated with the county, how that is handled?
2 different points. The landowner has the protection built into their lease, first. Secondly, assuming that we reach all the agreements and we get a CUP in place and a plan in place, at that stage we would work directly with the county and put together a decommissioning agreement.
We've submitted a draft already. So we've already done an initial draft, and you have it as part of your application. And the project is prepared to work on it for completion as quickly as possible.
And that agreement we expect will provide financial security starting in the first year. So, and that agreement would not allow the project to move forward until we've reached an agreement with the county that's comfortable with both sides. Property tax exemption, and I want to be real clear so there's no misconceptions. First of all, and I'll make this statement, I can sit down and run the numbers for you, but I will tell you that if we had to pay taxes on the energy that we're selling to our prospective off-taker and pay the standard property tax valuation, there wouldn't be a wind farm in Kansas. And it was that motivation that got the legislature interested in bringing the industry into the state and starting to talk about property tax exemptions. Now, we've talked that there's multiple other exemptions that are out there, but this industry would not have grown to the extent that it has without that. From our particular standpoint, the first 4 CUPs, which in our case, and I'm going to look to Jesse, represent about 60% of our project. All, area-wise, all are eligible for the full exemption, property tax exemption. They meet the state criteria. The new CUP will not. It would only be eligible for a 10-year property tax exemption. One of the comments, well, and Pat, I maybe defer a little bit to you, but we need to be careful, I think, from the standpoint of talking about exactly what the numbers are prior to your approval, because they don't like that to be a motivator. Let me just say that we've studied the market. We've studied projects in this area, and our investors are comfortable paying at or above those rates. And we obviously have to reach an agreement with the county before we can move forward, and I'm sure we'll have some interesting discussions around those. But I did want to make it clear that the first existing CUPs are under the old system, and the new one would be under the 10-year exemption.
And the old system being that they would be exempt forever. Is that what you're saying?
Forever, that's right. But let me only add to that. There's nothing that would prevent the county from increasing pilot payments at a later point down the road, right? I mean, we have to come to a general agreement, and our investors are only interested in making the project viable, and you know, there's methods that we can reach in that process to make it worthwhile. I'm going to close with my comments. I think that's right. On the production tax credit. Production tax credit does provide a significant incentive to us as developers and to property or to investors to invest in the project. With the current level of the PTC, the renewable energy prices by a significant amount are lower than any of the other 3 or 4 traditional amounts of power and pricing. If you don't like incentives, then things look good for you in the very near future, because starting in 2021, PTC will start to go away. It'll reduce by 20%. The next year it reduces by another 20%. Third year it reduces all the way down to 40%, and then it goes away. And at that stage, there will be no incentives. So there's nothing that I think from your standpoint that you need to worry about. The last thing that I've included in here, because we heard from the former governor of Oklahoma in terms of his opinion on the production tax credit and the value of the industry, I would encourage you to take a look at types of revenue that it generates in Oklahoma and the success that they've had over there. But Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa is the largest, in particular per capita, investor in wind energy. And Senator Grassley has been a strong supporter of the PTC. He ultimately voted for the reduction of the PTC, agreeing that the industry's grown up and we probably don't need it going forward. But his comment about how wind industry has supported rural communities, advanced domestic energy interdependence, and ensuring America remains a leader in wind energy technology, it's been critical to that level. So with that, I'm going to ask Jesse to join us.
Excuse me, but before you leave, let me invite.
Yep.
Could you expand a little bit more on the pilot program and how that, how you factor that? Is that a percentage? Because we're looking at approximately 5 different communities and 4 different schools, and you know, how do you go about negotiating that or deciding who gets what, and is that something that starts after a period of time? Is it like after a year of operation, or can you just expand on that a little bit?
Sure.
To clear my mind a
I
little bit.
appreciate that. That's
Thank you.
first of all, it's a mutually agreed upon program between the county and the developer. There are no, and again, Pat knows more than I do, but there are no specific rules. But I've heard comments that it's a promise to pay. It's a contractual agreement. It's as contractual as anything else that we're going to do with the county in terms of our obligation to step forward. One of the things that we would like to do is specify the recipients of the money. We had a meeting with all 4 of the school districts, and we'd like to work through the county and designate money, a certain amount of money to each one of those 4 school districts. What the final structure looks like, exactly how much, usually it's on some percentage, so much per megawatt of your project is the way quite often you calculate it. There are guidelines for us with existing projects that are in place, and I'm hesitant to say much more simply because that's the way the legislature wrote the law. They encourage that not be a give and take at these types of sessions. What I know I can't do is I promise you X if you approve our deal. That's what they're trying to avoid. But I know you've got good representation across the board, both legal representation and your staff. I'm sure we'll come to a fair agreement consistent with what other parties have agreed to. The only thing, as I said, we'd like to see is to make sure that all of the affected agencies get represented inside the agreement to assure that they all get paid.
Can you clarify the school districts you're referring to? Or can someone? There's more than 4 in the county.
Well, there are 3 full school districts that touch our project. You essentially got the Peabody and Marion are the substantial ones. Hillsborough district also will have a small piece. And then we also met with the special education district. And
That would be classified as the 4th one, the
that
special
would be
ed.
the 4th one that we're talking
Okay,
about.
thank you.
Yep.
Pat, is your contemplated pilot with all the school districts or additional?
No. Yeah, maybe I didn't clarify that. When we say we'd like to include the school districts, is that quite often the developer turns around, negotiates a deal with the county and walks away, and the county appropriates the money. And we've been encouraged to, within our agreement, assure the school districts get a certain percentage of that. But what we will tell you is that the biggest benefactor of the pilot payments is usually the county.
Yeah.
Right.
I guess part of my question is that I talked with the superintendent of schools in Hillsborough, which is where I live.
Yep.
And on the project up north by Durham, basically the Hillsborough School District was getting compensated for 3 turbines which were in our school district. Is that how you would allocate funds that way too, based on how many turbines might be in a particular school district? Because I see in the paperwork here that I think Marion had a larger proportion of money than did Peabody and Hillsborough.
Yeah,
Is that right?
first of all, there's nothing cast in stone with that.
Right.
But our initial look at it would say, well, depending on the area and the number of turbines in the specific area, that might be a way to communicate to the school district what percent they might be eligible for.
Mhm.
And so we have had that discussion with the school district
Okay.
superintendents.
And it's been a year now for the Hillsborough district, and they haven't seen any money yet. So,
Well, I think that's, first, again,
and I know you can't answer for them, that type of thing. But I know that there was a 1-year time lapse from operation to when the payments
yeah,
go.
there
But-
is the construction time period.
Correct.
And, we've already talked about some things that the county would like to see in terms of protections against some of their administrative costs and road costs and those types of things. There's no doubt in our mind, given what they have talked about, that there will be a significant flow of money, capital to the county, even in the first year. But as soon as the end of the first year, we would expect the school districts to receive their first payment.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make it clear that this isn't some money that's going to be coming down our way right away.
Yeah,
And that it's not something the school districts can budget on either, basically, because we don't know how much that's going to be.
Yeah, I think in the agreements, it should be pretty predictable at that stage. Once we've negotiated the agreement,
Once it's flowing, in other words.
well, and even once we've negotiated, it's going to be on some kind of per megawatt basis. And we're going to know how many megawatts we're building as we start construction. And so those estimates will probably be available pretty early. Okay?
Thank you.
Yep.
And just for clarity, those school districts are 398, 410, 617, and 408.
You always do so much better at numbers than I do.
Not true. These are right, though. I'm sorry? That's 617. Correct, yep. And just because I think Pat was getting there and he was making the point as well, it is our intent to delineate, but to direct, in the agreement, to negotiate an agreement that directs those funds to the individual parties, and so they will have something that they can budget on. Because it'll be based on a static megawatt nameplate installed, and so everything will be in place to be predictable.
Wouldn't that be affected by the weather?
No, this is not going to be based on production.
Just on.
Right. Okay, so the local project-specific issues that we discussed over the previous 2 nights. First of all, I want to just state very clearly, Expedition Wind is committed to securing all required federal, state, and local permits for the construction and operation of the project. That includes, and this is just a sample of them, but of course the county conditional use permit, United States Army Corps of Engineers for waters of the U.S., the NPD ES, as well as the SWIP that is underlying there, and then of course all the building permits. At this time, I'd like to invite Eric Hansen from Westwood to speak about the environmental aspects.
Yes, I'm Eric Hansen, and here to present some additional information. Last time during our presentation, it was quite concise, and so I hope to expand on a little bit of that tonight, and absolutely answer any questions that you have that arise here. So one of the issues that came up was regarding foundation depth, and the wind turbines are traditionally constructed on a spread footing, and there's a picture of one here with rebar in place and the lean grout mat underneath. But this is typically about 11 feet below grade is where these are dug to. It is strictly, it's just brute force. It's a spread footing, heavy enough to prevent over tipping and turning, and wide enough to spread out the load and support that turbine. So at 11 feet, there's not a significant impact to groundwater and regional characteristics. So, question?
Yes. What size rebar are you using, and what is the spacing on the levels of rebar?
The rebar specifically will be designed by a structural engineer. I'm afraid I don't have that number here. The foundation can vary in design somewhat and be a little bit more concrete intensive or rebar intensive depending on the soil conditions and the turbine manufacturer's spec recommendations. I can tell you that the overall span on that will be on the order of 60 to 70 feet in diameter, but I don't have a rebar size. I'm sorry.
And do you know what the layers of rebar are? How many layers? What's the spacing on the rebar?
I do not.
We do have a foundation design, preliminary foundation design on the project, and we have to provide that as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I've done geotechnical engineering as far as bearing capacities and design, but the structural is outside my expertise.
What's your degree?
In geoengineering and geology, 2 degrees.
Thank you.
Regarding research and information that's been formed to date, as far as contact with the Kansas Archaeological Society, that work has been underway, and we have moved through database research under a license agreement to access their records directly. My firm performed that in April of this year, and additional research had been done previously during some of the site screening studies. From the work that has been done, we know that there are a number of sites in the area, and also some historic trails that are present in the area. You can see here that no impact to the historic trails. So regarding the sites specifically, our research looked at the project footprint plus a 1-mile buffer, just to see what's in the area and what's known to have been recorded in the state database. We found 84 sites overall within that larger buffer. Breaking that down, 30 of those recorded archaeological sites are within the project boundary. And as we look at that developable area, where we can actually construct based on setbacks and our engineering considerations, 2 sites remain within that developable area. And that information is being provided to the design engineers, and it is the intention to avoid those sites with no impacts to them. Similarly, we've looked at the environmental components and working with the Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks, and Tourism. That work dates back to some of the earliest research in this footprint back in 2010. And the last time I briefly mentioned the Tier 1, Tier 2 studies that are undertaken according to some of the different guidelines that are out, especially Fish and Wildlife Service. And that initial research in 2010 was updated in 2014, and the research for a known species to occur in the area was backed up, and there was field work performed in April through October of last year, doing point counts on in the project footprint, looking for actual observations. What do we know to occur out in that footprint? Along the way, yes.
Did you have communication with them as an approval, or just is there anything more than just notifying them?
Yes. Yeah, actually, yep. Perfect timing. Perfect timing. Yeah, along the way, the initial consultations were just database research. That's part of the way the industry is set up. You get all the information, make your determinations, make your adjustments of the footprint, move away from that area. This area seems more favorable. And then starting in 2018, last year, as we moved toward site-specific studies, that communication path was opened up, and direct communication was initiated starting in April of last year with work plans. Information on the project was provided. So in April of last year, that's when first specific maps and project information were shared with both Fish and Wildlife and the Kansas Department of Wildlife. followed up with them in June and again in August, saying, hey, we're looking for information as we get ready for field activities here. And then in August, they responded and said, we have no major concerns with this footprint, but we would like to note the presence of the whooping crane migration corridor within your area, and that'll be a point of discussion. Similarly, in August, Fish and Wildlife indicated that they're no longer issuing direct comment or concurrence letters based on their staff workloads and the maturity of the industry and the guidance documents that they have in place. Then in December, we received formal written comment from the Department of Wildlife with some of their concerns, referencing the siting guidelines, known species in the area, and recommendations for the project overall.
Do we have information on their concerns and how those were addressed?
Yeah, is that in the packet that's been submitted?
Or could you make some comments about that?
Absolutely. In that December letter from the Department of Wildlife, they noted that there was no critical habitat present as they define it within the agency. They wanted to make us aware that we were in close proximity and adjacent to the Flint Hills grassland area, and similarly reiterating their observation that we were within the whooping crane migration corridor, and so stopovers were possible within this part of the county. So those...
Say that again, I didn't follow the last sentence you said. What was possible?
Yeah, so we were within the whooping crane migration corridor. So as you map their movement north and south over the years, it falls within a certain span. And so they just wanted to make us aware that we were within that corridor and that whooping cranes have been known to stop along their migration route in the county.
Do they have a map of that you can share with us?
They have a map of the migration corridor. Yes, that's mapped out on a national basis.
Do you have a copy of that?
I can get one, yes.
This is pertaining to that December 18th letter?
Yeah, that's correct. So in response to some of those concerns that they noted in that letter, the project currently has about a 1 mile setback, a little more than a mile setback from that Flint Hills grassland area on the east side of Highway 50. And in looking at the whooping cranes, we've evaluated the area briefly and operational considerations and how the turbines are operated when you shut them down, or shutting them down when whooping cranes are in the area is what's recognized as the standard approach in the industry.
We did a map. I can't remember if there was one submitted, but the corridor is a dynamic corridor which has several layers of likelihood of occurrence, and we are on almost entirely within the least likelihood of occurrence, but yet still within the corridor. So they brought it to our attention that we need to still be vigilant and watching for it, but we'll try to get you a good copy of that.
So in those, during that time of migration, the intent is to shut down the turbines? Is that what you're saying?
If whooping cranes are observed in the area of the project, yeah, because migration just says there's a likelihood of occurrence within that, high likelihood, and it just moves out lower and lower probability. So that flock is tracked quite actively, and so when they're in the immediate vicinity, that's when the shutdown would occur.
Approximately how long is that time period that
They'll move through a region in anywhere from a day to a week or two, depending on the weather and the food sources and the pressure for them to keep moving.
Thank you.
So the whooping crane is the only one, or are there any other species that are in that same study?
that was the only species that was listed, only species listed by the Department of Wildlife for its potential occurrence within the footprint. There was another minnow, Topeka shiner, outside of the area, and another minnow about 3 or 4 miles outside to the north. Other questions? In addition to the avian and wildlife, we're looking at bats and the acoustic monitoring. Microphones were placed and bat calls were recorded on site at 2 locations in the fall of last year, August, and into November. That monitoring was set up in some prime habitat around some of the water features, and there are 7 known species of bat in the county, and none of those are listed as threatened or endangered. And there are 10 species overall. 7 of those were detected in the bat calls, along with evidence of a call by an Indiana bat. We're still tracking that down to see exactly what that call means, because it is outside of their typical range. They're not expected to occur in this county. Fish and Wildlife has confirmed that there are no known hibernacula in the area where the bats would roost over the winter. And the Department of Wildlife, Kansas Department of Wildlife, did not list any concerns about bats in their correspondence with us. From a general wildlife standpoint, wildlife agencies regulate various species and afford protections and programmatic protections based on their species legal status. So that would include listed species, which are threatened or endangered, where the state or the federal government has gone through a study and determined that population numbers have reached a critical level where special consideration needs to be given. There are also species of special concern, or some variation on that theme in different states, where they are watching a species, but it is not afforded a legal protection. So as we look through those, and then there are general songbirds, passerines, waterfowl, other birds that may have a hunting status or are just protected under Migratory Bird Treaty Act from the 1930s. But as far as listed species, there are very few overall in this footprint. We have 3 federally listed species and 8 state-listed species. State-listed species I mentioned, the Topeka shiner, and of these, only the whooping crane is known to occur in the project footprint or have the potential to be seen in the project footprint. The guidelines that were used in laying this project out are numerous. The industry has adopted guidelines at multiple levels over the years. The Kansas Department of Wildlife has put in place their voluntary guidelines that dates back to 2005, quite early in the industry. And the project has looked at those. The Fish and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, has issued guidance for land-based wind energy in 2016. And those guidelines, as well as turbine manufacturers and others, have really driven the siting process over the years. So as we've looked at it, we have followed the state guidelines, which are voluntary but provide best practices. Those practices were actually laid out before most zoning ordinances were in place and often served as a proxy for local zoning ordinances. So they include wildlife issues. They also include socioeconomic issues to be considered, siting issues, a number of things. So there were only 4 counties had zoning ordinance in place in Kansas when that document was put together. So it was a document, guidance for broad use, and continues to be in place, but zoning ordinances have taken over the lion's share of promulgating expectations for projects. I think that's all I have. Are there any other questions on wildlife or other issues? Okay.
We did find that map as well, which maybe after this we can, my email, post it up so everyone can see it.
Thank you, Eric. Good evening, planning board members. One of the questions that was raised last week during the public comment portion was around Doppler radar and the effects that wind energy facilities can have on their ability to see. We did commission a Doppler radar study, and we have submitted that to the record. We hired ComSearch to do this. They looked at about 250 kilometer radius from the project. They found 6 operating licenses, and they concluded that 1 has the potential to be affected by Expedition's project. They recommended to us to reach out to them to discuss possible mitigation effects, or simply just to determine the angle which the radar beams from. Jesse reached out and talked with the chief meteorologist over there. Upon learning what their beam angle was, they anticipate that by the time their signal travels over the project, it'll be at about 1,500 to 2,000 feet above ground. Our highest turbine is anticipated to be around 500 feet. So at a minimum, that signal would be over 1,000 feet overhead, in which case, effectively, there is no impact. Sorry.
Go ahead. You might address it here. I'll let you keep on going.
I'm done with the Doppler, so if you have a question with that.
No, but I think a lot of them, they're talking on the ground. I mean, my own experience, you're talking about Doppler radar, some of the percentage on the ground, or there's and I'm just interested, it doesn't affect that, or?
No, our conversation with them is that their signal's so high they're not even reading what's happening at the ground level anymore. And that's why you've got 6 different operators around the area all looking and spreading and scanning. So they'll have multiple scans over the same area.
I've heard something different than that from others, but at the same time.
Sure, okay. Another question raised was around E911 systems. We did submit this study as part of the record and our application, and ComSearch concluded that E911 communication systems that are used in Marion and Butler County are typically unaffected in the presence of wind farms, and we do not anticipate any significant harmful effects to these services in our project area. They go on to describe that these systems are used for their ability to function in dynamic environments and non-line of sight, using multiple redundancies, transmitters, boosters to be able to get their signals across. Therefore, any blockage caused by the wind turbines does not materially degrade that signal. And if someone has an emergency, calls in on that line, an emergency operator does answer. Any questions regarding that?
Am I correct in recalling that somewhere in our documents, my notebook's getting pretty thick, I can't remember it all anymore, my mind is getting older, but there was reference that any interference on 911, any impact would be mitigated, would be guaranteed to be mitigated by expedition. Is that correct? It's not included up there on your comments?
Absolutely, that's correct. We are proposing that as a condition to the permit, and there will be a security that could be drawn on in the event there is an effect.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I thought. So there are quite a few, conditions that the project has offered up to help address or alleviate some of these topics. And they'll try to remember as they go through them to remind you, but sometimes there are a lot of topics. But to that point, the conditions that have been drafted that the project has proposed includes mitigating over the radar, the weather radar, right?
Yes.
So how would you change that? You buy this different system, or, was it buying a different system? If it doesn't work, it doesn't work.
I'm not quite sure what they would do. I mean, one of the issues would be relocating where their radar is signaled from, but I would have to leave that to an expert as to how they would go about that.
That comes out of Wichita, I think, after that Doppler is by the airport there. And,
In that report, there is a map for every one of the operator license as well as their service area in which that scans, so feel free to reference that. Another question raised during public comment was around farm equipment, GPS, and potential disruptions. Our understanding is that these work off both ground-based cellular and satellite systems. Again, it's a system that's designed with multiple redundancies to ensure that there's uninterrupted service in the event that there's blockage on line of sight, and that this allows for reliable use during bad weather and in non-line of sight times when a satellite cannot call down. Farming equipment continues to operate across the country around wind turbines with no material effect in the ability to operate and move. The last question, which I will address, that came out during public comment was in regards to aerial spraying. I have personally spoke with 4 companies from north, south, central, and southwest Kansas, specifically in regions where I know wind farms were located and they were operating. All but one indicated that they are currently flying around wind farms and will continue to do so in the future. All will continue to offer services, and 2 mentioned that they are expanding their service offerings to include helicopters because of their ability to be more mobile and maneuverable, and all will continue to service Marion County.
Did any of those have an added fee for working around the turbine?
Yes, several said they did require extra $1 an acre payment. One indicated that they do not require a premium at the moment, but they reserve the right to add that. And that was more on a wind farm to wind farm basis. The further spread out they are, the easier for the pilots to fly, the more compact it is, the harder it is for them to maneuver. They indicated that yes.
So it could cost the farmer more, but they would do it.
Yes,
Correct.
that's right.
and what would be the risk of them flying through there?
Potential impact.
And one of the things that we've done in this project as well is incorporate the willingness to work with any aerial sprayer who wants to work with us as far as when they're going to come out, so that we can curtail the areas that we do spray.
Good evening. I want to start by introducing myself. My name is Blake Johnson. I work with the real estate side of NRS.
Here's your call.
Put it up there in your mouth.
My name is Blake Johnson. I work with the real estate side of things at NRS. Also have a background in geography, so I do a lot of our GIS mapping as well. The first thing I want to focus on were some of the comments about a lot of our landowners being absentee and things like that. There were some comments in the Hillsborough Free Press, one being that only 18 leaseholders reside on their property within our footprint. we have found that we have 42 landowners within 1 mile of the project. Another one was that 60 out of the 80 leaseholders are absentee. That would be 75% of our project footprint. Oh, sorry. That is also false. So some of the numbers, I said the 42 landowners, 71 of those reside within the Florence, Hillsborough, Peabody, Marion area, with only 10 living out of state. And all of our landowners, 100%, do pay property taxes in Marion County. This is a map of those 42 landowners, just to give you a visual representation of where they reside in our footprint. Next, I want to focus on siting and zoning strategy. We did show this top portion in our presentation, but it just gives a representation of what our siting regulations are as compared to what the regulations for Marion County are, with ours being 1,500 for participating landowners and a 2,000-foot setback for non-participating. I'd also like to talk about the CUP buffer for within participating properties. In certain areas, this resulted in property line setbacks for non-participating landowners being about 3 times larger than the 550-foot setback that was explained as being sufficient by Dr. Chris Olson. These kinds of buffers have been used in CUP applications in the past and have been approved by Marion County staff. And now Jesse is back up.
I had a couple of things that we've talked about just prior to this that I'll touch on right after we get through this footprint explanation. As Blake said, the resulting buffer with our CUP application or CUP area gives ample space to neighboring landowners, especially those who are not involved in the project. This is This is a representation of basically what the property area looked like. This is slightly modified, but it's mainly just for a visual. If you take all of the leased property into the project area and roughly the development boundary, and pull away all of the areas for setbacks, which is homes, pipelines, all of those various setbacks, including roads and non-participating properties. This is what's left that we can put turbines on. And so it's a stark difference. And after you take that, you can see the left portion, the westerly portion of this project, which is approximately the last 2 miles. You can see Pawnee running up to Olney and west. That's generally what we've applied for in this new CUP area. And there's very little buildable area. It's worthwhile, but after the responsible setbacks and siting efforts, there's not a lot of room left to be had there. So we just wanted to kind of show you what the impact was. In conclusion, this is kind of bringing back what Dr. Chris Olson had described. Setback distances and non-participating residences and property lines are appropriate to protect the health. We've worked within all the constraints and designed the project responsibly. The additional setback to non-participating lines any additional setback to non-participating property lines makes it very difficult and largely not feasible for the project under its current situation. In the event the landowners wish to build in those areas that could be affected, and if they're concerned about sound, we're happy to work with any of those landowners to describe, the areas that are going to be impacted by sound more than others. Our door will be open that way, and we'll work with them. One of the things that we've talked about several times and it has come up is roads, road conditions, and road upgrades. Many of the roads within the project will require major upgrades in order to deliver equipment and just to be passable. We all know that. Those road improvements will largely stay in place for many, many years to come, for decades to come. Our efforts, we will commission an initial road study that includes a video, photo, and written study to the county so that the initial condition of the roads is very clearly stated and agreed. Further, we'll work closely with the county roads and bridge department for the flow, for any impacted flow to interruptions in the flow of traffic as required in the roads and maintenance agreement. We understand that the roads and maintenance agreement will be a condition, and we've proposed language to that effect.
Let me interrupt for a moment.
Please.
You spoke about talking with the road and bridge department to be able to do that. Are you talking about them specifically, or are you talking about an engineer that was chosen by the county to be their interface, who would have some structural knowledge?
We will work through that agreement with the county and anticipate that it will incorporate third-party involvement.
Thank you.
Yep. The issue of fire has come up. The interesting part with new turbine technology is two pieces. One, the suppression of fire in the turbines and the methods that we employ to prevent fires. There is a temperature sensor inside of the nacelle, the part on top of the tower. And once that temperature reaches a certain threshold, the turbine is put into fault mode, and in that fault mode, it's basically shut down. And so it is to prevent any heat events that could result in a fire. You may ask, what happens if it gets hit by lightning? Lightning is a similar circumstance. The new conditions or systems that are put into place to prevent or to channel and ground lightning strikes is it's very robust. And for example, if you were to look at the materials inside of the gearbox that one might think could start and could flame up, first of all, it's a mineral-based material. And second of all, the casing of the gearbox is about 1.5 inches thick. And so when a turbine is hit by lightning, it is directed straight to the ground, and we don't have any issues with fire in the nacelle in the gearbox area. We will, of course, incorporate training with local EMS and fire departments, as well as take the cost of that training, both prior to construction as well as during the operations and during the construction and during operations, to train for fire suppression, fire containment, and high angle rescues should it be necessary. Before we go to the Q&A, just a couple of things. If we could pass this map down, this might be the best way. This is showing the whooping crane corridors. Now, the red outline on this map that'll go down shows our prior footprint. That is when our footprint extended out beyond Mustang Road. And so I drew a rough line on approximately where the new Mustang Road line is, the westerly boundary of the project. And you can see that it does just creep into that next stage of whooping crane migratory area, but the bulk of the project is within the outermost migration area, the eastern side.
Well, that's sort of
Yeah, the Whooping Crane corridor is centered well west of this project footprint, and so the map this comes from a draft report that we have. That's why the site boundary is such. So as you move out to the outer bounds and the least probability of occurrence, I think it's 15% probability of occurrence in that outer band. So each year there's 15% probability that the movement could be in that area, and most of our project falls in that smallest percentage area on the easternmost edge.
Thanks, Eric. I didn't orient very well to that map. Sorry about that. Additionally, the comment was made about foundations, or the questions were brought up regarding the rebar size and stuff like that. We have done a preliminary foundation design on 2 different foundation types for the same turbine. They are relative to what the water conditions are in the area, and those foundations will be completed with a full design, stamped, and presented to the county prior to the construction building permit application, or at the construction building permit application as well. One other thing on Doppler, I just wanted to make sure that the Doppler radar question was properly addressed. So I spoke with the chief meteorologist at WKCH-12 in Wichita, and he actually identified 2 different Dopplers, even though only one came up in the study. And it wasn't that we had further interference with one. He just said, based on our 2 Dopplers that cover the area, by the time our beam gets out to Marion County, we are still reading the weather and reading it well, but anything below that 1500 interfere with the beam at all. And so he was saying, I asked very clearly, do you expect any impact from wind turbines in Marion County on your Doppler radar system? And he said, no, none whatsoever. With that, we do have some final comments regarding,
One question real quick.
Yes, sir.
You touched a little bit on high altitude rescue, that type of thing. All of our rescue people are volunteers in this county. I know if I was a volunteer, I have trouble on a stepladder higher than 8 foot. But with that being said, what is your preventive maintenance program on, because once they're installed, you're going to cut back your full-time staff to, if I remember correctly, around 15, is that right? So plus or minus 15.
Yeah.
So you would have to do a general preventive maintenance on a regular basis, I'm guessing. And if there was an issue with your person up on top, do the other 14 people that are on staff, are they trained to take care and assist with that?
Yes, that's a great question. And to answer the first part of that question, we expect that at least on a monthly basis, we will have somebody in that tower doing preventative maintenance in the up tower areas. And the staff, as well as the local EMT staff and fire staff, emergency personnel, as well as the police department and sheriff's department, they will all be trained at the same time. They'll all have the same training and same understanding of what the protocol is. You're welcome.
As part of your nacelle construction, do any of your nacelles carry any type of fire suppression within them so that when the threshold on the heat is triggered, that they would explode, suck up all the oxygen, something like halon or similar type material?
That's a great question. I don't have the best answer for you right now as to what the specific system is in there. One of the reasons I can tell you is that while we have scoped and we expect a particular turbine type to be installed in this project, that is still in just a little bit of flux. We don't have that final agreement with that that manufacturer yet. And so as we move through those agreements, those fire suppression aspects of it will be included in the final scope of delivery. We do not have that all hammered out quite yet.
But they do have some sort of fire.
They do. Yep. With that, like, as I said, we've got some closing comments as to recommendations and how we believe our project should be evaluated, at least the ways that we tried to approach the approval factors. But if there are additional Q&A questions that you've got regarding anything regarding the project, not just what we've been speaking about here, this would be a good time. We're all available to address those.
I guess I had a question, still with that same map, you said your setbacks, there won't be any wind turbines on your side right here, and the only part is in the green. So,
Wherever there is green, there could be a wind turbine.
okay.
You're right, it's very slim.
I was seeing maps of some of those presentations that have wind turbines up in other areas that were outside. Is this current? I guess this is current. What about the map that we were submitted earlier? They agree with this?
Yeah, they agree. This is more restrictive than what you see in that map, in the development plan map, just because that incorporates, the first 2 pages of that just are more general in scope, whereas this pulls in all of roads, railroads,
And
et
that's what I'm
cetera.
saying. I was thinking this, when I was looking at our presentation earlier, that was submitted way early, 2 weeks ago, it had turbines outside the green, is that correct?
There should be no turbines sited outside of the
I
green.
understand, but in that presentation, that earlier.
Earlier versions may have had turbines outside of the.
That's
Yep.
what I wanted to hear.
Yep,
I mean,
yep.
I was just seeing them from the earlier documents.
Yeah, we've adjusted, through this whole process, we've adjusted our own internal setbacks and moved things around up to when we applied for this CUP. And this agrees with the application this time around. Prior, there may have been some differences.
So based on your final document like this one, how many turbines are we talking about?
Under the current plan, 74 turbines. In the 6th CUP, and I'd have to pull that number. Do you recall? I'd have to pull the number for you.
If I interrupt you, it's been an hour and a half. If we would take a 5-minute recess, let's make a 10-minute recess, take a break.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to call this meeting back to order. I'll let you continue as you were. The-
For clarification.
I think the mic might be off.
For clarification, based on, the question was asked regarding the CUP application, the development plans submitted previously. Just to recap, our initial application we made in March. That was we were requested more information at that time. And so at that point, there were some changes that happened between that first development plan and then when we resubmitted the entire application. At that new application, what you see up here is consistent with that new application. And there was an adjustment that was made in the middle of that application as well. You've got the updated maps today. We understood that a piece of property was included under the previous CUP permits that were issued on the project in the area. And so we pulled that property out and excluded it from the development plan. So the development plan that you see here today excludes that property that did not have a CUP on it, as we discovered. Is there any question on the process of that?
Not really. The question I had with those same boundaries, I guess, what I was questioning where they're at, is on the boundaries, will there be legal boundaries? Or they, I know these are just sort of sketched in here. Is there going to be a survey done to get this in? Or what stage is that going to happen? Surveys for the...
If you're asking about the boundary for the development plan area, for the development plan that you'll take a motion on, that's the boundary area that's identified in
The white dotted line?
yes.
Correct.
Yes.
And that was, go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't know about that.
It does.
Okay, great, yes, yes. Yeah, so the development plan area is an area that overlays a development plan area is just approved as part of or updated as part of a CUP. And so a CUP boundary area is established every time, with a legal description. And yeah, the CUP exactly has a legal description tied to it. So the existing CUPs that already exist, the first 5, those already have legal descriptions, the ones for most of the project. And then it's just the new application for the 6th CUP that will be an added legal description to the project area. And then the development plan area, for the development plan to be approved, it's just the same CUP area that's already been legally described. Does that?
Yes, that answers that. The other question is like these offsets, where the boundaries are of the offsets, setbacks and so forth.
Yes.
Will that be surveyed as well?
To document or complete surveys?
Correct.
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the conditions, right, that we added?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Where's that at?
Yep, and,
Where, you mean process when is the survey to be completed?
Well, yeah, where is it in the documentation?
it's black and white. Right.
Just the boundaries, that means those boundaries are offsets. Because I understand the legals, those are legal boundaries. You can go to the courthouse and that's no question, but these offsets.
Right, so, yeah, the setbacks, right. So one of the conditions that was requested and that by the staff and the project has agreed to is that each of the setbacks will be certified in writing by a licensed and qualified professional engineer approved by the Marion County Zoning Administrator. And so your process includes the ability to have a qualified professional measure those setbacks. That's
Let me interrupt a moment. What you just put forward is illegal. According to the Kansas State Board of Technical Professions, a professional engineer is not qualified to verify measurements. That is the purview of a licensed professional land surveyor. A professional engineer cannot do that unless he also carries the license of a surveyor.
Sure. Pat, would you like to just cover that with the board?
How about if I cover that? I am a
sorry.
retired professional engineer.
Sorry.
I don't know what the law is.
Right, and so certainly it wouldn't be my position to attempt to advise you on the law, sir. So that language that I just read was what was included as requested by the county to include in the CUP. But
It's obviously not correct or sufficient enough to cover everybody.
Happy to consider an adjustment that might be required.
One of the things that you will have the power to do is to make recommendations as to the if what you decide to do is recommend approval, you'd have the ability to make recommendations as to the specific conditions. One of those things that you may want to do is to have a condition that deals with this question. It's also true that if you do not need a legal description in order, if what we're talking about is not drafting a legal description for a particular purpose, it may be that what is necessary for compliance with your conditions will be something that does not require a surveyor. It's possible, depending on what the condition is, that it would be something that would require a surveyor.
To clarify for myself, for each individual wind turbine, excuse me, would you do a survey for participating landowners before you plat the turbine?
There will be a survey done prior to construction over the entire site.
For each individual?
It will encompass each individual property, yes. Of those participating in the project.
Participate.
Correct.
Does anybody else have any questions? Continue on.
At this point, I'd like to invite Lindsay Ransom to discuss the next area.
Good evening. Thanks again to each of you for your service to the county and to its residents. This is a long process, and we appreciate your time and effort. As we know, it's an extremely important topic to get right. Expedition Wind's application in front of you only requests two actions from the Planning Commission. The first is to review and approve the updated development plan for the project land within the existing 5 CUPs. And so if you look at that map that we had distributed to you earlier, that would be the tan area on the map lying east of Pawnee Road. These 5 existing CUPs are already granted and vested for Expedition Wind to construct a wind project. The land within the 5 existing CUPs was legally zoned for a wind project by the county back in 2000, from 2010 to 2015. And this land area is also within the original wind overlay district since 2004. This meeting is not to revisit or appeal those land use decisions. These 5 CUPs have their initial plans already in place from when the CUPs were originally granted. Tonight's action is just to merely update those 5 CUPs, the existing development plan on those 5 CUPs. County law describes in detail what is required of this development plan. The Planning and Zoning Director's June 3rd staff report indicates that Expedition's updated development plan meets each of those county legal requirements to approve this development plan update to the land area within the existing CUPs. Expedition Wind submitted an unprecedented amount of evidence and detailed information surrounding the development plan per the regs. The second action we're requesting is recommend approval of the new 6th CUP, which is the bright yellow areas on the map, as per this conditional use application PC-1405. In doing so, it would also incorporate the development plan for that area and subject to a set of conditions that we're proposing here tonight. Recommending approval for the CUP and its development plan is fully supported by the attached factors and conditions, which we distributed to you as well tonight. I'm not going to go into specific detail on the 11 factors, but in your packet, there's 5 or 6 pages that we've outlined each and every factor.
So Lindsay, what she's referring to now is the 16-page. What she's referring to now is the 16-page document that we handed out at the beginning of the meeting, along with the copy of the PowerPoint. So I think she's on page 3 of that document.
Yep. So it goes on for several pages of why Expedition believes that we have been compliant and even exceed many of the approval factors for recommendation of approval from the board. Some highlights of within the regs that we just wanted to bring up is that the purpose of the overlay district, the mere existence of a WEX overlay is to ensure regulatory means for facilitating wind energy. We understand this is something that the county wants. It is something that the county has already approved very recently, within the last year and a half. And they've done so on much less stringent proposed conditions that Expedition is proposing here tonight. Additionally, several of the approval factors relate back to the Marion County Comprehensive Plan. A lot of the areas that we really demonstrate how our project complies with the plan relate to land use goals, for example, which in the comprehensive plan state that it is to provide opportunity for orderly and efficient development of land, which will achieve fiscally sound and environmentally safe county while maximizing compatibility among land uses. And I just want to highlight the fact that we have 5 existing CUPs. The 6th we're requesting is integrated adjacent to and amongst these 5. So land compatibility from that standpoint is pretty high. Socioeconomic development goals is to encourage and expand the opportunities for new development and the expansion of business opportunities within Marion County to promote quality growth within the county and all of its cities. The Fort Hays economic impact study that we had commissioned, and it's referenced several times throughout, is $143 million of economic value, and you heard a lot from several landowners that want to see that economic value come to the county. That if but for this project would be non-existent. I touched on the approval factors, on the compatibility. I mean, it maybe goes without saying, but obviously the turbine site and the road take up very little land for a participating landowner out of production. So just generally, it's compatible with the agricultural land in this area. Public benefits are enjoyed by the global public, whether or not they are supportive of the project. And so obviously, several private landowners through land leases will benefit economically, but several businesses will as well, and that's inside of this $112 million economic benefit study. The public benefit to the tune of $30 million. Tax relief, which goes back to what Pat was discussing on, when we come to an agreement on the pilot, there will, the county will be able to fill its coffers with, significant funds to help so that tax levies don't increase and maybe even go down. School contributions, we mentioned, again, whether or not you support the project, the schools are going to benefit. And again, as Jesse touched on, the improved roads, and you heard from a few Diamond Vista folks that, the roads in that part of the county are actually doing pretty good at this point. Safety measures and responsible siting. Again, I'll highlight some of the increased conditions that we're proposing tonight. But as we mentioned earlier, the county has approved projects with setbacks that are much less than what we're proposing. And the same is true for the noise and shadow flicker restrictions that we are proposing as well. As we mentioned earlier, the financial security and reimbursements to the county with respect to basically any of the communication systems in the area, E911, Doppler radar, communication towers, AM/FM radio, all of that is being proposed as a condition to not only provide the assurance that we won't materially affect these systems, but that if we do, we have to have security in place to put in mitigation, repeaters and those kinds of things that will allow for the county to, in most cases, solve any problems that do arise that maybe we haven't thought of. So there's sort of backup measures that we're proposing to put in place to confirm that these issues are not, that there's not a problem. A lot of the, Jesse touched on a lot of our sort of process related to the construction permit. And, the roads, specific fire safety plans, the idea of this post-construction monitoring relative to environmental concerns, noise compliance, setbacks compliance. These are all things we want the county to feel comfortable that we have and will and do address prior to construction. That's what the construction permit process in our minds is all about. We get the process of the CUP approval, and then we go to work on design and everything that we need to get to the point where we can come to you with a stamped drawing and a plan that gets the county comfortable that all of these measures are taken into account, and we've crossed every T and dotted all the I's. So in the packet that Trish mentioned, I think if you go, let's see here, if you go past the approvals to page 9, I believe, 10. If you go to page 10, this is what we are essentially proposing for our set of conditions. Sorry.
Apparently, we've been given a draft copy. We don't have a page 10. It goes, maybe there's a different copy that we need.
No, I can explain the best that I can. So when we left Wichita mid-afternoon with the 16-page packet, it had, at that point, the project's most updated set of proposed conditions. And since then, the project has continued to work with Planning and Zoning Director on the county's proposed version. And so what we did to attempt to assist the Planning Commission with its review of conditions tonight is that the version of the conditions in your packet, let me look at yours real quick just so I know what page it. Right. So you go to page, yep, that's right. So after page 9, what would have been page 10, right? What that document is it's 6 pages of county staff's most updated set of proposed conditions. And so what we did just an hour before the meeting is we just ripped our set out because what we were trying to do is present to Planning Commission as close to final agreed upon set of conditions as possible. And so that's what's in your packet, allows you to look at the 6 pages of conditions that were the most available copy to us before the meeting of the proposed conditions by county staff. And then what we did for you is we showed in that red pen the handful of places where the project had not yet been able to reach final comfort level with the version of the conditions proposed by staff. So that's what you see in those 6 pages.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Did you have another question?
Yeah, page 1 of 6, it's jumped.
That's right.
So page 1 of 6 is,
Not there.
okay.
It was a copy of the motions that are your last page. Yes, that's why. Yep.
So I guess it doesn't, the language, how it actually reads, I think is most of, any difference from the versions, but this is still true in that the proposed conditions incorporate all of the conditions that are required as per the regs, which includes entering into roads agreements, decommissioning agreement, and fully anticipate entering into, obviously, the pilot and the schools agreement, as we've discussed. We've also incorporated the conditions that were already in the existing 5 CUPs, so that it's sort of a comprehensive look at the conditions for all 5. I guess it would be all 6. And then additional conditions as proposed include several of the staff recommended conditions, which FAA, a requirement for FAA DNH's determinations of no hazard, disturbance limits, noise study, and written verification of the setbacks are due at the construction plan. And another one that was brought up by the staff was the FAA possibility of adding radar detected lighting system on the turbines, so that it's basically there's radar installed on all of the turbines, and that basically determines when the lights go on, as if there is a aircraft in the area. They're able to determine it, and so there isn't a blinking light scenario the whole time. It just basically comes on when there's aircraft in the area. We're open to including that, provided the FAA allows us to, basically. So we've added that as a condition. Financial, as I mentioned earlier, financial security for all of the radar communication systems. Reimbursement for the administrative services relative to the enforcement of the conditions. We've added that. And then, of course, the setbacks that we've all mentioned, the 2,000-foot setback from non-participating residences, the 1,500-foot setback from participating unless waived, which, again, Marion County standard is, I think, at 1,320. So we're at a higher standard even for participating. And we do that in all of our projects. It's a standard for us. Less than 30 hours a year of shadow flicker for non-participating residences, and then the 50 dBA at existing exterior wall of the non-participating residences, which, as Dr. Olson described, is a pretty stringent standard for noise. And then the indemnity, as was requested by the staff recommendation as well. So that is, I guess, what we're here to discuss. We're happy to answer questions or discuss specific language on certain conditions. And Trish, I'll have you help me in those discussions as well. So.
I have a question. I wasn't on the board when the first 5 cups came through, and I know, we've got the 6th cup coming tonight that we're going to go. Will there be like a 7th and 8th cup? I'm guess I'm trying to catch up. Yes. Will there be more cups? Because we've got 5. Okay, 5 already, and I thought from my perspective, those were cups that were to be acted on. and we've got a 6th, and I just need to be understanding, will we get a 7th and 8th, and when will they be coming in?
We have an interest in building 200 megawatts. This site with the existing CUPs and the new CUPs fully meets that 200 megawatts. We have not leased any property that could lead us to a second phase, and there are no immediate plans to do so. We understand we'd have to start that process over again with a new CUP if we did. We're focused on getting this project done. So I know there was references in the hearing that, gee, somebody's leasing way out here, somebody's leasing way out here. The only thing that we did is that we abandoned, from an operational standpoint, probably about 2,500, 3,000 acres west of Mustang. Those are still leases with our project. They will continue to make land payments, as we talked about. We're not going to just cut them loose just because we gave up on that land. But we're not developing that property. We have no right to put turbines in that property. I want to make one other comment that I think is important for you to put in perspective. The existing 5 CUPs have their own sets of conditions tied to those CUPs. One of the things that we thought was important as we started this whole process is if we're going to expand a little bit, which we needed for making sure that we had enough space to build the full 200 megawatts, which was our size of our interconnection agreement, is that let's build a project that's better than what was planned in the original 5 CUPs. And let's take the expanded setbacks and expanded conditions that we proposed in the 6th CUP and spread those over the other 5. And that's what we're committing to as we move forward with the development plan as proposed. Is that, I think we've talked about that a little bit, but I want to be real clear that that's our expectation and should be yours. Any other questions?
Does anybody have anything else for the applicant?
I'll go ahead and just walk you through a couple of the pages in the submittal, and that, because I know then you'll turn to discussing them amongst yourself and with staff and with council. So in the conditions pages that we were talking about that have some of the red pen marks, again, those identify the version of the last version of the staff proposed set of conditions that the project, Expedition Wind, can also agree to. And as Lindsay was just describing, that set of conditions that you're looking at, that Expedition Wind is willing to agree to, is much more robust and protective of the county and its residents than prior versions have been. And it includes beyond what's just required in the zoning regs themselves, but also adopted as many additional requests of conditions that staff, that they could agree to, along with self-imposed conditions by the project. So there are a couple places where there's red pen, and again, Pat Hughes will be able to go over some of them when you discuss it as a group. But I've been able to at least communicate with him a bit this evening on a couple. And so I'll go ahead and explain to you what we've already explained to Pat Hughes. On condition 2Q, as in quick, which is on, it says page 506 on the bottom. That's a condition about noise, and what the project has proposed and what they presented in decibels in terms of the 55 and the 50 that you heard about and the presentation. That was a presentation and intended to be in dBA. So that's why where you see that the proposal says decibels unweighted is stricken. What the project can agree to as a standard is 55 dBA and 50 dBA, where you see that. It's important to the project that's the measurement for the use of those numbers. That's how those numbers were used in preparing the project proposal. In condition 2, N, as in Nancy, on the bottom of page 4 of 6. Again, you see some red pen marks there. However, in getting to chat right here before the meeting, I believe we've worked out a resolution on that and terminology. And again, Pat has our specific drafting on that. So I think it's possible that we could have that one resolved. And then again, you were reminded several times of the factors. And so Lindsay took you through some of them, but if it's helpful at all for you as you continue to consider the application, the factors provided for you to consider it are provided starting on page 3 of that handout, and it goes for several pages because there are 11 factors. And what the project did for you is identify all 11 factors, and then they dropped in underneath each factor the pertinent facts and information specific to the project that support each factor. Much of that information the project has worked to try to provide for you as they've presented for 3 days, but certainly they remain open to answering any additional questions that you might have about whether or not a factor is fully met. So I thought that just might help you in walking through the materials that we've provided. What other questions do you still have that would be helpful for Expedition Wind to answer for you before they close their presentation of the project? Great. If anything comes up during the additional staff time, just let us know.
Okay, I think at this time we are ready for Sharon. While they're working on that, I just thought I'd make sure, does any board member have any questions for the applicant while we're waiting?
This isn't as much a question as a comment in that I work here in Marion County in the real estate field. And part of your application states that there's 11,300 residents probably to be moving out by 2030. And my one hurdle I have trouble jumping over is the fact that if we add a wind turbine sector, let's just call it, so we're potentially removing anybody that would potentially want to move in another business and or building site. And so I just have to be perfectly honest with you and the group, even though you've done a great job, I think, of presenting how you would go beyond the setbacks and things like that, which I appreciate, and I feel like the roads in that area definitely need improvement. But that's just a hurdle that it's hard to address because I know that I've firsthand seen properties that are for sale close to that area where people are not willing to even look at them, you know, based on the fact that there's a potential for a wind farm. And so that's a hurdle I personally need to get over. So a comment on my part.
Do you have a response to that? Or I guess I haven't completely closed everything yet.
I'm not sure if I quite understood. I think you were speaking more to the valuation of the property adjacent to the wind farm? Correct. But there was a reference of number of residents?
According to your statistics here, you were saying that Marion County is losing residents. And I'm afraid that if we put up a wind farm, we're potentially limiting anybody from coming in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm not saying that
I thought
you're limiting them from coming in.
I thought we were going to drive out 11,300
No, I'm not saying
right
that.
away, but no, I don't
Marion
think
County is a declining county, is what
I think that, and we don't need to revisit a lot of the things we've talked about, but just a couple of comments. First of all, the first 18 to 24 months for wind farm is a tremendous amount of change with all the construction that's going on, and there is an awful lot of concern during that time, and I think the studies we provided to you have said that as well. But I think you can already see with what's happening with Diamond Vista that there's also kind of a calming circumstance. And if you look at what's happening with Diamond Vista and then prospectively this project, the amount of additional value that you bring to the county in terms of taxes. I mean, imagine what would happen if suddenly you became one of the lowest property tax areas, you know, over the next 5 years. That would in turn, I think, bring people to come out here and farm and, you know, add to the life. You know, you've got 3 or 4 communities in this county that would appreciate additional residents. And I think in the case of what happened with Diamond Vista, you know, there's been at least a half dozen, I've heard as many as 12 to 15 people now living up there, moving into that area associated with the wind farm that weren't there before. And I would expect a similar circumstance like this. So you gotta weigh things back and forth a little bit. And I think the only comfort that I can give you is that we work with folks and wind farms every day and been through dozens and dozens of wind farms and talked to plenty of landowners, including those not participating. And the impact and the sense of what goes on at that wind farm and how it fits into the landscape gets much easier on a day-to-day basis with people that get comfortable with the environment. And, you know, in Minnesota, counties with wind farms in them are the most prosperous and growing counties in southern Minnesota on a consistent basis. And that's plain and simply because of the revenue they bring and the value that they bring to the land when you start adding $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 a year to that ag operation. And those are attractive things that you don't see today. And you will see those things over time. So.
Thank you. I think at this time we will move to Sharon.
Okay, so I'm going to work through these suggested conditions. The first one being conditional use permit holder must provide initial drafts of the following agreements within 30 days following the adoption of a county resolution approving the CUP and will work diligently in good faith with the county with the goal of both parties executing such agreements within 120 days of the resolution date. There must be a decommissioning agreement in place covering the decommission and/or reoccupation of the wind energy conversion system in case of bankruptcy. Must have a road maintenance agreement in place covering the following: the roads to be used for ingress and egress from the WECs that are not part of the state of Kansas highway system, the standards to which such roads will be constructed prior to development if necessary, the standards to which such roads will be subsequently maintained by the CUP holder, the form, manner, timing, and frequency of maintenance and upkeep, and training for local emergency medical services and fire protection personnel, and reimbursement to the county of expenses of administration of the road use agreement and impact fees based upon the mutually agreed plan for the county administration. Must have an agreement in place ensuring the county has adequate security to draw upon in order to cover the cost to mitigate wind project material interference with any of the following systems during the first 5 years from the commencement of construction: 911 emergency radio systems, AM/FM radio systems, county communication towers, and weather radar systems, including Doppler Radar. Must have an agreement to adequately compensate Marion County for third-party governmental services and for impacts related to the project. Must have an approved development plan containing and/or addressing the following: turbine setbacks as certified in writing by a licensed and qualified professional engineer approved by Marion County zoning administrator, 500 feet or total turbine height plus 50, whichever is greater, from public roads, 500 feet or total turbine height plus 50, whichever is greater, from property lines of any property not included in the CUP, 2,000 feet from a non-participating residential structure existing as of the date of this resolution, and 1,500 feet from a participating residential structure existing on the date of this resolution, unless otherwise waived in writing by such participating landowner. Disturbance limits shall be indicated on the construction site drawing. Due to unforeseen circumstances, each wind turbine location, as shown on the submitted construction site plan, may be permitted to be relocated no farther than the noted disturbance limit without the need for additional conditional use permit review. The owner shall submit an amended zoning permit application, and each relocated turbine will be required to comply with all of the conditions of approval, except where impractical. Communication lines and power collection lines are to be installed underground. Above ground transmission lines may be used only in public rights of way, easements, or other legal rights dedicated for such purpose. The lowest point of the rotor blade shall be at least 50 feet above ground level. All lubricants and/or hazardous materials shall be kept and transported in accordance with all state and federal regulations. Filing and maintaining with the Marion County Zoning Administrator a current FAA determination of no hazard to air navigation letter verifying that each wind turbine in the project area, when constructed in accordance with the construction plan, is not and will not constitute a hazard to aircraft. Lights only be installed if required by the FAA and must be red unless otherwise required by the FFA. We're asking that the applicant will apply for an aircraft detection lighting system, and if granted by the FFA, such system shall be used. Each turbine must be a self-supporting tubular tower painted a neutral color such as white or pale gray, contain no logos or advertisements, and be marked with a visible identification number. Are you still with me? Okay. Must not cause material interference with microwave, television, radio, telecommunications, weather radar, or navigation contrary to the Federal Communications Commission regulations. must take reasonable measures to mitigate specific adverse visual impacts such as reflections, shadow flicker, blade glint affecting occupied residences existing on the date of this resolution. Applicant will ensure non-participating residences have no greater than 30 hours per year of shadow flicker, verifiable by a third-party assessment company.
Sharon, excuse me.
Okay.
Our document has some additional words included in item J, the one that was prior. Do you want to include those words or not? That you did not include it when you read it. What are your comments on that?
Okay, those were some suggestions that we were contemplating. I'm going to let Pat speak to that.
With respect to J, I think we feel that the way that it was suggested by Sharon is probably adequately clear, and the addition of systems affecting the project footprint adds some lack of clarity that I'm not particularly comfortable with.
Thank you.
So item L, a fire mitigation plan identifying the potential fire risk associated with the WEX, also addressing high-angle rescue and how the towers will be protected from fire. If the WEX project contains riparian watershed areas, native prairie grasses, or other sensitive areas designated by the county, the WEX owner shall identify the manner in which the WEX project shall comply with the following requirements. The manner in which the riparian watershed areas, native prairie grass areas, or sensitive areas on any site shall be preserved or shall be substituted for open space as approved by the zoning administrator. No clearing or grading be permitted within 125 feet from the center line of any drainage area unless otherwise permitted by the zoning administrator, and any development that is determined by the county to fall within the limits of the historical Chisholm Trail, Santa Fe Trail, or related historic, natural, or man-made feature shall comply with the following requirements. Any trees that are determined to endanger the preservation of trail ruts or diminish the visibility of a trail shall be removed under the direction of the county or the county's appointed designee. Interpretive signage is approved by the county shall be provided if applicable. And to the extent reasonably feasible, the WEX project shall be designed, constructed, and operated so as to have the minimal impact on existing historical or cultural resources, including the designation as off-limits for construction or operation activities in construction plans. Prior to obtaining a turbine building permit, an overview of the existing environmental issues will be
That is consistent with all material representations made by Expedition Wind in connection with the public hearing.
Thank you. Shall be documented and filed with the zoning administrator to include information regarding wildlife habitat, bird migration, and the potential for bird strikes, flora, vegetation species, threatened species officially listed, critical habitat and habitat conditions for such species, fauna species, habitat assessment, threatened species officially listed, migratory species, critical habitat and habitat conditions for such species, geoconservation, sites of geoconservation significance listed on the state and national database, and flood zones. A soil erosion, sediment control, and stormwater runoff plan addressing what types of erosion control measures will be used during each phase of the project, identifying plans for grading, construction, and drainage of access roads and turbine pads, design features to maintain downstream water quality, revegetation to ensure slope stability, restoring the site after temporary project activities, and practices regarding disposal and/or storage of excavated materials, protecting exposed soil, stabilizing restored material, and removal of silt fences or barriers when the area is stabilized, and maintenance of erosion controls throughout the life of the project. No light source greater than 1 foot candle shall be directed into any public right-of-way, directed to cause glare onto any vehicle roadway, or cause light trespass onto any residentially used or zoned property. And audible noise created by the WEX shall not exceed 55 decibels unweighted at any time measured by the property line of any non-participating property, and 50 decibels unweighted at any time measured at the exterior of non-participating residences existing at the time of this resolution, provided that the zoning administrator shall have the authority to establish that decibel measurements be taken based on a reasonable weighted decibel measure determined by the zoning administrator to be an appropriate basis to assess the control relevant noise levels as they potentially impact neighboring properties. Further, along with the construction permit application, applicant will provide Marion County Zoning Administrator with third-party data created by the WEX for all residences within a half mile of a turbine, which must demonstrate the projected compliance of the project with the sound restrictions. The site shall be disturbed and cleared only to the extent necessary to assure suitable access for construction, safe operation, and maintenance of the WEX, including the minimizing of tree removal, and no grove of trees or hedgerow or shelter belt shall be removed without approval of the landowner. On cultivated land, compaction of the land shall be minimized and confined to as small an area as practical. All waste and scrap that is the product of construction, operation, restoration, and maintenance from the site and must be properly removed and disposed of upon completion of each task. A vegetative barrier of 20 feet must be constructed around the base of each tower. A construction permit shall be required for the construction of each above-ground structure. If any dirt is moved or brought into the floodplain, a floodplain fill permit must be applied for with the Kansas Division of Water Resources, and all local, state, and federal floodplain regulations will apply. And a floodplain development permit must be applied for with the county for any structures shown to be within the designated special flood hazard area. We're getting close. Must designate a field representative responsible for overseeing compliance with these CUP conditions, in providing and maintaining throughout the life of the project an indemnification agreement with Marion County, which indemnification terms the county may elect to include instead in other agreements between the CUP holder and the county rather than a standalone agreement, and a policy of general liability insurance with policy limits reasonably satisfactory to the Board of County Commissioners, which identifies Marion County as an additional insured. And lastly, if the controlling majority of the equity ownership of the WEX transfers, notification of such transfer and acknowledgement by the new owner of compliance obligations shall be provided to the Marion County Zoning Administrator and the Marion County Clerk. Contact information for any such new owners shall also be provided to the Zoning Administrator and the County Clerk.
Sharon, I think we have a question, if that's all right.
Sure, go ahead.
How about how about a point of clarification? Let's go back to where I have a professional engineer. Actually, I'm quite capable of going out and measuring distances, but I can't put my stamp on it. If I do, then I was still actively practicing. I would no longer have a license. The correct term in there should be licensed professional land surveyor.
I think we can address that as we talk about the issue. We can amend the conditions to correct that issue.
Yes, that's correct. So at this point, I'm giving some suggested conditions to the board for your consideration. So if there are items in these conditions that you'd like to discuss, that would be appropriate.
Thanks, Sharon. At this time, unless somebody else has another question for Sharon, we will move to Pat.
Thank you. There are two matters that are before you this evening. The first is making a recommendation to the County Commission with respect to the conditional use permit application that's been submitted by Expedition Wind. The second is making a recommendation on the development plan that's submitted by Expedition Wind. I'd like you to think about those as separate issues for the moment because we are analyzing them differently. And I'd like to begin with what we're looking at with respect to the conditional use permit application. You have a couple of options. One option is to recommend that the application be denied. The fact that staff has provided proposed conditions, if it's approved, does not prevent you from denying the application if that is your recommendation. The other option you have is to recommend that the application be approved. And in so doing, you will also recommend conditions on the approval. In determining what to recommend with respect to the conditional use permit application, you have heard a number of statements that have been made to you by people making presentations. Some of them may be a little bit misleading, so I'd like to talk with you about what it is that you do as you are determining whether to recommend approval or denial. You are able to make any recommendation that is reasonable. You should consider, but you are not limited to, those factors that are set out in Article 9 of the zoning regulations. Any other factor that's reasonable is one that you can consider in making your recommendation. You can consider the aesthetics, and you can make a recommendation if it's reasonable where that is the controlling factor, if you consider that to be the controlling factor, or that is the only basis of your recommendation. The previous approvals in past projects and other projects are not a binding precedent on you with respect to whether to approve or disapprove, with respect to setbacks, with respect to noise levels, or any other feature. We are looking at this project and where it sits within the county, and you can impose conditions that are the same as or that are different from other projects, or you can deny a specific project where other projects may have been approved. The purpose of the conditional use process is to allow you to look independently at each proposal and determine whether it's suitable, and if so, under what conditions. However, you should not consider, one of the factors you should not consider in the process of determining the appropriateness of this project is promises of payments in lieu of taxes. This is a quasi-judicial proceeding, and promises of voluntary payments may be improper as a consideration for you in determining whether to allow this project or not allow this project. The representation that the county could increase pilot payments in the future or later down the road is not necessarily a reliable description of the county's power, but in any case, it's not relevant to the decision that is before you tonight. However, it is appropriate for you to consider other natural economic benefits that may occur as a result of the project just as it would be proper for you to consider any evidence that you might find credible of negative economic consequences of a proposed project. Similarly, considerations of federal tax policy are not related to the decision before you tonight on local land use. And finally, with respect to the staff recommendations, I understand that one of some of the materials that have been submitted to you by the applicant argue that the lack of a recommendation on approval or denial by the county's consultant is something that perhaps would carry some weight. You should know that the county's consultant, Mr. Avey, has not been retained to give any opinion or any recommendation with respect to approval or denial. You can recommend, if what you decide to do is recommend approval, then you can recommend any conditions that are reasonable. You need not follow the recommendations of staff, although you should consider those recommendations. Any representations of the applicant that you are relying on as a basis for approval, if you choose to recommend approval, you should consider making conditions to the conditional use, the approval of the conditional use application. I would note specifically with respect to 2Q that the applicant has told us that the 55 decibels should be a 55 decibel dBA and the 50 decibel similarly dBA rather than unweighted as staff has recommended, and has told us that this is a significant matter from their perspective with respect to the viability of the project. So that is the basis for their request that there be a 55 and 50 dBA measure rather than an unweighted measure. What we're talking about is the relative importance of various frequencies of sound in determining what the overall sound measurement is in decibels. As the applicant has suggested, the 55 decibel and 50 decibel numbers originally came from, I believe, their proposal in which they intended to have those be measured in dBA. Because your decision must be a reasonable one, it would be helpful for you to state the reasons for your vote at the time that you vote. It would also be appropriate if during your discussion before voting, you make certain observations about your opinion and the reasons for those, for you to incorporate those statements, those reasons, as reasons for your vote. So rather than repeating them, you could say, for the reasons that I discussed in our earlier discussion, I vote however it is that you would be voting on a particular motion that's been made. Your process will be for, after your discussion, for someone to make a motion. That motion will be a motion to approve with certain conditions or a motion to deny, for there to be a second on that motion, for there to be discussion on that motion, and then that can be called for a vote. And so that will be the process and how you should be thinking about the conditional use permit application and your recommendation. The second part of what you're doing here this evening is making a recommendation with respect to the development plan. You have the power here to recommend the approval of the development plan, to recommend the denial of the development plan, or to request changes to the development plan. The development plan approval stands on different ground from the CUP approval. In Marion County, under the zoning regulations, a CUP must include all of the land within the unincorporated area of Marion County that will be used for the project. Expedition Wind has a series of CUPs. However, the development that Expedition Wind has presented requires the use of some additional land that is not within any previously approved CUP or the current CUP application under review. Specifically, transmission lines may be expected to use land that is not within an approved CUP. So in answer to the earlier question of should you expect further CUP applications, the applicant's answer dealt with CUP applications to expand the area within which there were turbines. And I believe their answer was that the capacity of the land that they have for CUP currently is sufficient for the number of megawatts that they intend to ever generate from the facility. However, you may anticipate a future CUP application in order to include land needed for a transmission line. So there may be an additional CUP application. And as a result, you might find that approval of the development plan at this point would be premature. And that the approval of a development plan for this particular project should await the whole area for the project having CUP applications that have been approved. If what you find is that the development plan as presented is sufficient, acceptable, and worthy of approval, but for this issue of the approval of the area for the transmission line, you might want to approve or recommend the approval of the development plan conditionally. That is conditioned on a CUP being granted for any remaining land needed to be used for the development plan. That would prevent you from having another hearing and decision on the development plan because you would have already acted on the development plan. So are there any questions with respect to the process to be used this evening in assessing either the conditional use application or the development plan? All right, thank you.
I think with that, if staff has finished, we will close all public comment and begin our board discussion. I'm going to first start off with a statement from Kathy, who was unable to be here tonight but was here last week. She prepared a statement that I am going to read, and after that I will open it up for any comments. I would like to start by saying that I am fascinated by wind turbines and have been for many years. My first exposure to the turbine fields was on a trip to southwestern Minnesota and then in southwestern Kansas. The turbines are calming to me, and I just enjoy sitting in the area and watching them. With that being said, when I received the packet of Expeditions Wind's proposal, I was determined to be fair to both sides of this issue. As I went through the application and documentation, I made notes and jotted down questions that came to mind. I read through all the emails, went to the websites that were suggested, and more questions arose. In particular, the low-frequency noise and the health risks that have been attributed to infrasound. Also, the noise created by the turbines when running. What better way to answer these questions than to drive to Tampa and check it out? I spent a Sunday afternoon amongst the turbines and next to the homes located in the area. The noise that was produced by the turbines was not awful, but it was noticeable. When I moved away from the turbines and closer to the homes, I did not notice much of a decrease in noise. I should say that I did not trespass on anyone's property, and my observations were made from county roads. What I did notice was that the turbines did not stop the birds from singing, nor did it disrupt the cattle from grazing. The trains could also be heard over the turbine noise, no matter which turbine I was at. This trip did not alleviate my concerns about the low-frequency noise, but settled my concern about the proposed 50 decibel noise. I sat and listened to the noises in my house when there is no television or radio on, and I can hear the clocks ticking quietly in the background. I can hear my refrigerator running, and if I have my overhead fan on low, I can hear it. Is this what is meant by low-frequency noise? If so, these things do not cause me health problems, and I've lived in my home for 30 years. During the public comments, I made notes of the main concerns from those opposed to the approval of the CUP and the questions and the reasons, for the acceptance of the CUP by the proponents. Regarding those concerned about the wind turbines, the unsightliness is only a personal preference. There is always going to be something that we do wish to look at. The effects of the turbines on nature, in particular the bird population, was another major concern. I have a concern about the Kansas Department of Wildlife letter dated December 18, 2018, and would like to see Expedition Wind provide the additional information needed by the KDWP for them to complete the review. The last recurring statement was that was dominant throughout the testimony was setbacks. If the setbacks were greater, then the project would be more acceptable. What is a reasonable setback? We as a planning commission regarded the industry standard of 1320 feet from an existing non-participating residential structure was adequate. Expedition Wind agreed to 2,000 feet from the existing structures, which exceeds our regulations by a little over 50%. I do feel, however, at least at a later time, we might want to go back and review our regulations concerning both the setbacks and the noise levels. The decommissioning of the turbines was also a concern during the public comments. This is regulated by the county with agreements in place prior to the construction of the project. In comparison, the oil industry is not regulated by the county, but by the state. Have you ever noticed how many concrete structures are left after oil pumps have been removed? One last concern that stood out to me was that the fact that the majority of landowners who have leased their property to Expedition Wind do not live in the county. Whether this is true or not, these landowners are still paying taxes in Marion County. If the landowners do not live in this county, they do not have the ability to vote concerning the raising of their taxes. They simply must pay these taxes if the mill levy increases. Mill levy's increase has been approved by the majority of the county voters. Now for the reasons that I would vote to approve Expedition Wind's CUP requests. The proposed development area is a positive benefit to the residents of the area and to the county as a whole. With the road maintenance agreement that Expedition Wind is required to have with the county, I feel that the road department will be able to devote more time and resources to other roads that are in much need of repair. It might not seem like a big thing, but to the residents that live on these roads, any improvement is appreciated. Secondly, the businesses in and around the proposed area very well see a much needed influx of business, especially during the construction phase when most workers will be here. There are businesses that are struggling to survive, and even though the construction phase of this project may be only 8 or 9 months, this could make a huge difference to them. As stated in the public comments, not all the money will stay in Marion County. But to this I would counter that there is less than 1% of residents in Marion County that can say they spend all their money in the county. This is a fact of life, so having some extra money spread around the county is a good thing. When the Planning Commission was going over the comprehensive plan, the public was invited to voice their concerns through attending a meeting of the Planning Commission and/or by taking an online survey. 42% of those taking the time to fill out the survey state that they would like to see industrial growth promoted throughout the county. 34% felt that the county government should help build cooperative relationships between businesses and local city agencies, and 24% felt they should offer incentives like tax breaks to businesses and industries. 3 of the 4 top priorities for the county were to control taxes and spending at just over 50%, promote economic development and jobs at about 55%, and providing road and bridge maintenance at just over 50%. The participants were also allowed to leave comments at the end of the survey. One of the comments said, "The biggest disadvantage that Marion County has is a lack of vision moving forward. The local and county government is short-sighted and is steering all of the communities in our county into a slow demise." By approving the CUP, we not only have the vision of moving forward, but we are also supporting what residents of Marion County felt were important. With Expedition Wind meeting all the county guidelines, and in some instances exceeding them, I feel that case number PC-19-01 should be approved. Kathy Enlow. And with that, I'll open it up to comment from the rest of the board. Okay.
My turn, I'll start in. My review of the package was based on the original package that came out, and of course we were instructed that that was no longer valid, and that we would go after the new package. I find that the new package that was submitted to us, in which we were supposed to be basing our review on, was quite lacking, actually. I've got some documentation I'll hand out to the board. In the meantime, I can talk a little louder. I spent over 30 years as an engineer. In that time, I wrote proposals, I reviewed proposals, I evaluated proposals, I bid proposals. And then I had to defend them and negotiate them with whoever the customer was. So I'm a little bit familiar with putting one of these things together. Some of the items that are listed in here have been addressed. Part of them haven't, which are significant. I'm not sure I've got enough for everybody else, but we'll help out down this end. I know you need to make copies, so there's one without a paperclip on it even. Reviewing the presentation that was made in the packet that we received, I found quite a few items that were not included in it. The original version that we had, yeah, not a lot, better sit down. The original packet that we had a pilot included with it and some other documentation that was pertinent. On the resubmission, a lot of that documentation was left out. I don't know if you want me to go through this whole thing. I've got 4 pages here, part of which is recommendations that probably are more pertinent to the county as far as how much a road maintenance agreement should entail. I mean, just because I'm not practicing, I'm retired, doesn't mean I don't know how to run a pencil still. So that's how I evaluate stuff. You want to go through all of this?
I guess my comment, on to that is, as Pat kind of stated, the pilot and the RMA and some of those are agreements made post CUP approval as conditions. So I think it's all valuable information. What we want to consider is the land application use tonight. Does that make sense?
We'll have no meeting then?
For
For the proposal itself?
we're considering the proposal along with those uses.
Well, there's a few items in here. There's some omissions that I think are very important. You know, I can't make a valid evaluation without knowing some of the things. I don't know if we have any easement here. Let me put my glasses on. I'm going to need to read my own writing here. Some of the things that bother me in here is the project overview map that came as part of the package. It actually violates Article 27. I think that issue's been addressed somewhat by Pat saying that it covers the entire property, not just a portion of the property. We don't have a road maintenance plan based on what the Vista folks say. Why, they say that we should be getting about a little over $3 million for the initial repair of the roads. But changing out the blades, they have a 10-year life, is what the industry standard is, maximum. So we're going to have that same amount of traffic. In that regard, we've also got the decommissioning, which was not included in any way to know what's going to be going on in that area. Since there's no pilot included in this current proposal, there's no goodwill for the school districts. It's been talked about, but there's nothing here that says that's going to take place. The original CUP called out how much money was going to be given out and what was going to be used based on the fact that we were going to get 200 grand out of that and the schools will get 160. That means Marion County was going to get $40,000 a year. Lincoln County is getting $5 million over 10 years, which that's $500,000 a year. So there are no hazmat plans or documents included. There's no plan for turbine blade or repairs in the event of bird strikes, lightning strikes, or delaminations. There is no site established for the designation of a blade repair facility. There's no plan on the replacements themselves in that regard. There's no plan for disposal of the wind turbine parts. Blades and blade repair materials should be removed from Marion County. If it's to be believed, Ellis County had a little experience on that where the property owner ended up owning the blades because of a use of the English language and can I put this here? Sure, go ahead. And it ended up being the property owner. Whether that in fact took place or not, I cannot verify, was not able to verify in conversations with people from the area. The blades need to be removed, period, and it must be done in a clean room. Carbon fiber dust has proven to be a carcinogen by the aircraft industry. And since I come out of the aircraft industry, I'm kind of used to dealing with those materials. FAA flight corridors are not sufficiently identified. You can go pick up a pilot's map anywhere and look at them. The only restricted area will be for a bombing range or the target range up at Fort Riley. So they don't necessarily have the clearance that we want. And in the language in the proposal, it says these are generally approved. That means they are not approved at this point in time. There's no documentation to show that they are. DOD, the Department of Defense, doesn't really talk a whole lot with the FFA. Sorry. Hey, I got it right that time, instead of saying FAA, which is a little closer to home, but they don't really talk about the flight corridors that exist. Documentation from the DOD needs to be included because they've got other things going on that they don't necessarily talk with each other to tell who's going where and who's doing what. In the revised proposal we got, there was no definitive number of turbines, no definitive statement as to turbine size. Federal policy concerning wildlife changed mid-2018 to a more formal format. There's no copy of that finding from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We do not have a current Kansas Department of Wildlife Parks and Tourism document included that showed on in there. Allusion was made to the Kansas Historical Society. We still don't have any documents on that. That was in part of the package. A lot of the supporting documentation is from the industry, which is patently biased, plain as fact. It's not necessarily science-based. There's no definitively identified path for the connecting line to go into the power grid. Properties outside of the field parameters. How are they going to be addressed? Is that going to be by public eminent domain of the public property? Purported life of the field, presentation showed 10, other people talked about 30. So what is the life of the field? How long do we have to maintain roads and everything else? Some of the documentation that Expedition paid for, I think, is a little bit faulty. The site characterization study, page 2, is quite patently false. Kansas Department of Wildlife and Parks is currently conducting an ongoing study of the greater prairie chicken, and it's funded by license fees that's charged for everybody that wants to go out and hunt in this park. Part of that study area is included within the footprint, which also includes leks and nesting sites. There is no letter from the Kansas Department on page 8 referring to the letter. This page 11 documents an avian point count taken on April 27th, October 15th. Shows no bald eagles were present. Of course not. There are very few nesting pairs in the area, excluding El Dorado Reservoir, which is not that far away, actually. Bald eagles, along with golden eagles, follow the waterfowl migration and generally arrive in this area in late fall and thereafter. The reference to a study that was done on page 12 of the documentation from Westwood references a 1988 study, which is now woefully outdated. No official federal documents have been included to support the stuff. Probably one of the better items on this thing that apply is that from one of the audience presentations, if in fact the lease payment as presented by that particular presentation is in fact $5,000 a year per tower, then the property owners are being shortchanged since this apparent going rate in Kansas has been $15,000. Those are some of the major things that I think are important that need to be addressed, and I don't think that we can fully make a cogent decision on the applicability without that information. And I'll quit.
Can I just make a quick comment? So it's unlawful for the Planning Commission to approve a CUP that includes a pilot agreement. So I requested that Expedition remove that from their application. And then the decommissioning and the road maintenance agreements would come later before construction permits.
And how are we to determine if the county is being protected if we don't have some inkling of that information?
The county commissioners would negotiate those agreements.
And we have no input on supplying that information to them as part of our recommendations?
You are empowered to make recommendations that are reasonable. And so if what you want to do is make recommendations with respect to conditions that include more definitive terms that you would recommend in the road maintenance agreement, you could do that.
Not if we don't have the opportunity to do that. So you just said the opposite of what Sharon just said.
But we have the opportunity, if we pass a motion to recommend approval, we have the opportunity to list a conditional use along with that motion, which could be a road maintenance agreement, or not an agreement, but options for them to consider.
How do we address the hazmat issue?
In the same way, if you wanted to have a condition where you were recommending approval, but only if there were certain conditions satisfied with respect to hazardous materials, you would make that as part of your motion, so part of the recommendations.
And if we haven't defined that yet, how can we make a motion?
If you decide...
Doesn't this board have to decide what those things should be, and then we make a motion on that?
No, you have, somebody will make a motion of what they are asking the board to vote on, and that motion will either be approved or it will not be approved. One of your options would be, you could continue this hearing and you could request additional information if that's the motion that prevails, and ask for additional information from the applicant. If you did that, it would probably be a good idea to specify exactly what additional information it was that the commission as a whole was requiring before moving on with the decision.
One, as I've studied the application that we have before us, I looked at it through, having gone through previous applications in a lot of different areas, as I looked at what we did with the coming up with a comprehensive plan for Marion County, what we wanted to include in the county, what was approved by our board, as we studied the issues over quite a lengthy period of time, and as we presented our recommendation to the county commissioners, again, going through public hearing and getting that comprehensive plan approved. That gave me a general guideline as to what I was framing my discussion on. I appreciate your comments, Dwayne, about some of the details. You're a detailed-oriented person. I tend to be too, and I admire for your comments that you've made, and thank you for that. Some of the details were covered tonight that I had some of the same issues that I made note of. They were addressed adequately, in my opinion. I recognize that we will not be able to sit here at this table and ever come up with a project that we will know every last detail about everything that's been listed there. And so how to deal with that, we're going to have to wrestle that out and figure that out, where we go with it. But I agreed very much with what Kathy had indicated with the positive factors that come to Marion County, the issues of roads, economic benefit. We were looking at promoting jobs. We wanted better roads. We wanted tax relief. All of those things come into play. And so that starts to align with what our comprehensive plan was guiding us, in the direction it was guiding us. So I think the conditions that we have listed before us by the staff have been, there's a lot of good material in there. That helps me get a little more comfortable with the areas of uncertainty. I recognize that we will not know sitting here within an inch where every turbine is. I'm comfortable with that because there's guidelines that will allow it to be placed where it needs to be within the constraints that have been spelled out in the application. There's details in there all throughout that, where that leaves us, we're going to have to kind of come to common ground and figure out what the answers are to that.
This is William Kropa. I just was a little bit concerned because there are a lot of these issues that we might have brought up here in the little time here. And I think a lot of our governments will approve something and then read it later or validate it later. And I think it's concerning for me to give us the go-ahead before we get all these documents in place. Well, it's always this, trust me, it will be paid for, Doppler will be fixed. it will all be taken care of. And I guess there's a little bit of a concern from my point of view that it's just sort of a blank check that we're all backloading into what are the actual details. And some of those are pointed out earlier here. But go ahead, I just was voicing my concern there.
I've got a comment to that. We are approving or denying recommendation to the county commissioners. So we are not the final answer here. We are holding the public hearing to give the public a chance to state their opinions, and also us basically to help the commissioners make their decision and make it easier. This CUP would, if it was granted, is conditionally upon those factors. And so I realize, yes, it is a bit of a blank check at this point, but they cannot do anything if they don't meet those factors to continue their project. Does that make sense? Does that clear anything up? And I might, if staff has anything to add, they will not get the permit if they don't meet those conditional use factors, or meet the factors included. So, and that's one thing, like the pilot agreement, the conditions stated in this CUP, they must meet in order to continue to complete their project. And so like Sharon stated, the pilot agreement, the road maintenance agreement is all determined through the commissioners.
A little bit of a disagreement in that we're making a recommendation to the commissioners, and they have the ultimate decision. They're the ones that are going to make the decision on this. What we're trying to do is provide them with hopefully a thoughtful guidance tool for them to use. Does not mean they have to use it.
That is what I meant. I apologize if that's not how it came across. But that was, we are providing guidelines for the commissioners to help aid in their final decision. Because this in the end is not a final decision for the project, for the CUP. And you wanted to comment too. I guess I was going to add my comments for the project. I don't have the technical expertise that you have. I can't approach it that way. I can approach it in my observations. And I realize they're observations of a different project, but they are the closest thing that I have to relate to what this project could be. I realize they could be different, but also I feel like they will continue along those same lines. I live in Tampa. I farm around Diamond Vista. I farm in Diamond Vista. I experienced all of the construction, all of that phase, all of the people. I'm going to back up and say I experienced the anticipation of construction with planning and building and increasing and improving properties ahead of construction, which in turn turns into higher property values because of those improvements. I've got a list here somewhere. So in anticipation, I experienced those things: property improvements, improvements to housing facilities, the ability to rent housing facilities. There was not an available property to live in during the project. Local businesses experienced huge gains. Just the amount of rock hauled from quarries in this county via employees or via companies with trucking companies in this county who purchase fuel, oil, tires, repairs, everything went back through the county. As a result, from the payments. I've experienced property improvements. I've experienced increased sales tax from those uses. I've experienced fire departments with money to improve their facilities, schools to improve their facilities, landowners who are receiving payments who are improving their homes, improving their farm sites, adding buildings, buying new vehicles, which I think is also comes back to income for the county via taxes. I think there's a lot to tell from that project there's a lot to happen that is too soon to tell, but I can tell you from living in the area, the benefit to the local economic concern has been overwhelming. I have no direct impact, I have no direct income from that project. I spend a lot of time there. I farm in the middle of it, as I said. My GPS works just fine. In fact, last week, I spent all of last week around that farm and had no trouble. It is a little hectic, as they're trying to finish, and I realize that as again, I'm speaking to that project, but I expect this one to be similar. It's a little hectic, but I feel like in the end, the community, the county, the citizens of this county, while we're not going to satisfy everybody. But it doesn't matter what we do, somebody will be happy and somebody will be mad. But I feel in the end, the community, the county, the citizens of this county end up as a larger benefit. I don't have exact numbers to put to that, but it's just observations that I have seen recently with a similar project that I feel could be a benefit and positive outlook for this county moving forward.
One of the challenges as we look at the uncertainty of a road maintenance agreement and the pilot money, where that's going to go. Those documents are to be developed. What I look at is the outcome of it. I don't have the expertise to be able to spell it out in what we're dealing with here. I don't think it's appropriate for us to try and micromanage those details. And that's kind of where I come. I don't have that expertise to say, if you call for a road that's 40 feet wide and that, well, what if it really needs to be 60 feet wide, or what if it needs to be 20 feet wide? We have our county people that are in charge of that. I don't see that as our role. That's not what we're entitled to do. What I have seen, though, is this application has come with outstanding documentation, went way beyond what we have expected, what we requested. They've exceeded our regulations, our rules, to make it more appropriate for the footprint that they're in. They've pulled back areas. They've made adjustments. So they've been working with us, and I would look forward to an ongoing relationship with them in a very positive way in Marion County.
Dwight, I think everybody, and everybody on the board, everybody here brings a separate set of tools available with them, and that's why with the commission that we have here, we've got an opportunity to avail ourselves of everybody's individual expertise, and that helps the whole group make a sound decision, I think. My concern is whether or not the property owners are being compensated appropriately based on other wind farms within the state, and whether or not Marion County as a whole is going to end up getting bit by this proposal. And that's my main concern. I need to protect Marion County. That's where I'm coming from.
I have the same feeling. We're all here on this board to protect this county and its citizens. At the same time, as far as payments, we were given a potential turbine payment. They also stated in their presentation today that there is an acreage payment that we didn't have that value. So it's a little hard to equalize the payment with other projects as they presented. They discuss it, or they approach it a little differently, how they calculate their payments. Now, I do understand, and I am right there with you, that it is the citizens of this county that we are trying to protect. But at the same time, those citizens of this county some are for, some are against. But how do we deny those who are in favor of this? I don't know, I kind of lost my train of thought there. Yeah, how do we deny them the economic value? Thank you. That they deserve.
Exactly my point. I'm not sure if they're getting what they deserve that have signed up for this particular thing.
Is the economic value?
Now, I don't know how to judge somebody's pocketbook.
We can't define that for anyone.
I was going to say, is the economic value to this project for each individual landowner our ultimate decision, or is it
What benefits the county as a whole?
correct?
That's what we're at.
I appreciate what you're commenting, Dwayne, but I deal with contracts on a daily basis, and I know that every contract is different for each individual. So I don't think it's our place to dictate what Expedition Wind would contract with each individual landowner. That's between the two of them. And we would hope that each individual landowner would get their fair share. Personally, that's none of my business, and I feel it's up to Expedition Wind and the individual landowner.
Buyer beware.
I recuse myself, but I've got to say a couple comments here. I'll try to keep it brief, but I agree with you guys. There's no way we can dictate what they're doing with each individual contract. Now, I think going back to what some of these guys are wanting to do with the road maintenance agreement and a couple of those other items that are not included here. The last one I was involved with up north, one of the commissioners stated the county got screwed, if I was quoting the paper right on that one, from what the county got money-wise. So then they were pointing the fingers back at this board because we didn't get the right road agreement done with them. We don't do the road agreement. It comes from the three commissioners. So I tell you three to get it right. It's not up to us. You guys get it right. You guys make sure we don't get screwed. So you take over and roll with that. So.
And I think that goes back to our part of our condition is that we state that they must have an RMA or that they must have a pilot, but that is not our purview, I guess, to specify the details. That's what they are elected to do.
Not that they can't seek our advice.
They are more than welcome to seek our advice. I didn't have any direct questions related to that. I don't have the expertise, like Dwight stated. That's what we have, county employees. I'm sure there will be third parties involved in those decisions. I personally don't feel I have the expertise to approach that issue. That's why I leave that for them.
As far as the commissioners go, I see that all three of them are here. So as far as I'm concerned, they are taking and considering our advice. And they're listening to the input, both pros and cons.
Is there any additional comment? Anybody have anything they'd like to add? Russ?
I may just want to add that once your recommendation gets forwarded to the Board of County Commissioners, they do have the option, if they feel that one area of the CUP has not been addressed adequately, could always send it back to the Planning Commission for further clarification on any one or more particular items. So there is that fallback position.
Any further discussion? If there is none, I would entertain a motion if somebody has one. Or further discussion. I'm open.
Everybody's smiling.
Because you got the mic, I'm glad.
Based on what I had said earlier about the way the plan we have before us works together with our comprehensive plan, this conditional use permit, I'll go ahead and make the motion to recommend approval of the application. PC, we got the right number there? PC-1901. With the conditions that were listed earlier by the staff, with the change noted on item number 2A, that be, rather than a professional engineer, be a Kansas professional land surveyor.
Is there a second to that motion? I know that's a lot to comprehend at one time. I guess I would like to second it if that is, I want to double check that that is possible. Can I get a second first and then we can go to that process? You can amend a motion before the floor that's been seconded. We just haven't voted, as long as we haven't voted it. We will have discussion on this motion. Yes.
Second motion.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, thank you. It's been moved and seconded to recommend approval of PC-19-01 with the, I think he meant with the conditional use, or with the conditions stated. Yep, stated by staff with the amendment to, here, you took my page. With the amendment to 2-A to strike professional engineer and include Kansas professional land surveyor. Any discussion on that motion? So,
And such other conditions as may be brought forth for the proposal.
do you move to amend the motion by adding in such other conditions?
Yes.
Okay.
Such as the hazmat. We don't have a hazmat plan. That's business as far as I'm concerned. For the health of the people that are doing it and the health of the county.
Is, not yet, I'm getting ready to ask, is there a second on that amendment? The amendment's been seconded to add and such other conditions as they arise.
How do you have something that vague? I mean, that's...
The hazmat plan is vague?
Well, no, but no, as other conditions arise. What does that mean?
Well, you can look at the documents that I handed out to you. There's several things in there that probably should be included in the conditions to adequately protect.
But they aren't being spelled out by that document, by that statement. That motion doesn't spell out anything you have in here.
You want to start it all over again, we can do that.
Currently, we're debating, discussing the amendment to the motion. I have a second on the amendment. We are discussing that amendment currently. My thoughts on that amendment is it is, I don't know if vague is the right term. It is not maybe as clear as it should be if we are doing this. Because that basically gives us, I guess, the open-ended option to add any condition or really anybody add any condition. That's just my thought on the amendment.
Within this, what we were requesting in the motion that was made, we are saying that all lubricants or hazardous materials shall be kept and transported in accordance with all state and federal regulations. So we do have those regulations there that will help protect Marion County if we have faith in our state and federal government. We all realize that that's not always what we would like. But I think we, if we're going to set regulations that are more stringent than our state and federal regulations, I'm not sure how we're going to define that. So,
I mean, I guess I agree with Dwight also is, in those conditions, basically we require them to meet state and federal regs. I don't have the ability to recommend more stringent hazmat or regulations than that.
It does not appear that Expedition Wind is aware of some of those requirements.
According to this condition, for their CUP to be valid, they will have to meet all state and federal regulations for hazmat.
We don't have that documentation.
That's part of our motion and our conditions of the motion, of the permit.
Can I interrupt for just a second? They have responded to that item in their application regarding lubricants and hazardous materials on the premises in connection with the WEX facility.
And that was in the package that
Yes.
you sent out to me?
Yes. It's under this, well, I don't think you have tabs.
the colored pages?
absolute. Which page? 7 and 19.
Sharon, if that's in there, I missed that, so.
Would you like to look at it before we
No, that's okay. I have to take your word for it just as well as everybody else has to take my word for it, so I can work with that.
Okay, so on the floor, we have the motion, the amendment to the motion to add an all unforeseen conditions. Is there any more discussion on that? We're going to vote on that amendment to the motion, not the motion, but the amendment to the motion. All those in favor of amending the motion, please raise your right hand. All those opposed, same sign. Motion to amend has failed. Any discussion? I assume there is more discussion on the motion to recommend approval with the conditions stated by staff, with the amendment to the 2A. Or, yeah, change in text to 2A. Does anybody have any further discussion or comment? If there is none, we will vote on the amendment to approve, or to recommend approval, sorry, of case number PC-19-01 with staff recommended conditions. As I call your name, please state as you are in favor or opposed and your reasoning. Dwight Fleming.
I approve, as I've noted earlier, and how it meets the expectations of our comp plan and the benefits that it would have for Marion County.
Glenn Thiessen.
As I stated earlier, I had some concerns about property values and things like that. And I did make a personal trip to that part of the county, or that part of the county. And based on what I saw is there was some need of improvement over there. And there was a big differentiation between the original CUP and the additional CUP as far as ground and how the ground is being used. Based on my opinion and what I saw and what I've heard here, I would vote to approve.
Thank you. Brad has recused himself. Derek Belton, for what I stated earlier, I realize we cannot satisfy every member of this county. I think regardless of how this turns out, somebody will be unhappy. My opinion is the economic benefit to the county as a whole outweighs some of those issues. I vote in favor. Dwayne Bear?
I'm going to vote no, and that's simply because I don't think that we have sufficient documentation to support the proposal in front of us, and I would like to see a complete package in one piece rather than having it piecemealed in to us like it's been done.
Thank you. William Kropa?
I recommend the denial of this CUP due to the fact that there's open-endedness of backloading all the documentation that I feel would be some of the homework that we've done before we go through it all.
Thank you. Jim Schmidt?
I would vote to approve the
a motion based on information I've heard previous 2 evenings. I've also been through that area, and I think it would be an improvement as far as roads and stuff. It is going to be an adjustment, but I think there would be some advantage to Marion County.
On that, 4-2, the motion carries to recommend approval of PC-19-01. The other issue that we have to consider is the development plan for the existing CUPs, including this one. Any comment or discussion on that? If none, I'll entertain a motion.
I would be interested in a little bit of discussion among the board as to what you're thinking as far as the issue with an additional cup with the transmission lines. That's the issue that kind of hangs out there for me. I think we have a project boundary in front of us. Is there a way that we can define how that would be played out with the request for transmission lines coming on, which would be on public right-of-way, I believe is what this proposal is. But that's an area that's uncertain.
I really don't think that that's something we need to concern ourselves with, because the county has already passed Resolution 2019-05, which provides for that. It did not come before us. It went directly to the county, and they passed that resolution back in May.
That is not accurate. The resolution that you're referring to merely gave the applicant the ability to include county road right-of-way in the application. It did not approve the use of any road right-of-way by the applicant. It merely allowed them to ask for this group to make a recommendation on an application that included road right-of-way. The road right-of-way that has not been, there's been no action on with respect to a CUP, I understand to be KDOT right-of-way rather than county right-of-way. But the zoning regulations of Marion County do not contain an exception for any state-owned property from the application of the zoning regulations. So therefore, a CUP that approves the use of that portion of property as part of this project would be necessary under the Marion County zoning regulations.
I feel comfortable with the development plan that's been presented. So could you review for me again, help me think through that, or maybe others on the board might have the same type of question as to how to address that?
If you're comfortable with the development plan, then what you could do is recommend that it be approved conditionally on the approval of a CUP for all of the land in unincorporated Marion County to be used in the project. Alternatively, you could recommend that the county commission table the question of the development plan pending a CUP application for the remainder of the property that would be needed for the project. But if you recommended that they table it, I think that leaves an open question about whether you're going to be coming back to the issue or not yourselves here.
With the amount of time that we've invested in it, I work better when I can continue the thought process rather than come back at some later point and then try and reinvent my thoughts or the wheel. I would lean more towards trying to come up with a plan so that we can move it forward and not continue to come back and have another discussion about the same things.
No, I asked her, this is William Crowfoot, I was asking the question earlier about cup number 7 and 8. I guess when we'll equip, or is it, we'll be looking at cup number 8 here to address this transmission lines, correct?
Presumably that's true, that they'll ask for additional land in order to use the road, the KDOT right-of-way. It is within the realm of possibility, and I'm not speaking for the applicant, I'm telling you, it's within the realm of possibility that they might find a different route for which they ask for permission from the
Would it be
KDOT right-of-way.
Would it be limited to 1 cup, or would it be like continued on?
Presumably, there would just be one additional CUP at this point to complete the area needed for the development of the project according to the development plan. The decision of what they're going to ask for lies with the applicant.
What we are discussing currently is approving the development plan overall of the existing CUPs. For the I guess I should say for the old CUPs. We approved the application to add the new CUP. We are discussing whether to approve the updated development plan for the old CUPs. And within that, whether we add a condition for an approval for the transmission line into that. So I guess a little clarification. We would add a condition, I guess explain maybe that process of this condition to...
what you would be recommending to the county commission is that they, upon the approval of a CUP for the transmission line, approve the development plan. So essentially, you would be communicating to them that you're not recommending the immediate approval of the development plan because not all of the land that's in the development plan has been approved for a CUP at this point.
So would a motion that said that a development plan be approved with the condition that an approved cup for the transmission line is approved?
The development plan as presented be approved provided that an additional CUP is granted to complete the area required for the facility.
I so move.
Is there a second to that motion? Does anybody have a second to that motion? The motion, he moved to approve the development plan conditionally that there will be a CUP for the transmission line. So it's been seconded. Any discussion, any further discussion on that? All those, as I call your name, please state whether you are in favor or opposed of recommending approval of the development plan for conditional use permits from Marion County Commission Resolutions number 10-19, 11-22, 2014-13, 2014-22, and 2015-15, with a condition that there will be a CUP for approval for the transmission line. So, again, I will ask if you are in favor or opposed to recommend approval of the updated development plan as presented for the following existing conditional use permits. Marion County Commission Resolutions number 10-19, 11-22, 2014-13, 2014-22, and 2015-15, with the condition that there will be a CUP approval for the transmission line. Dwight Fleming.
I approve based on my previous comments.
Glenn Thiessen. I would approve. Brad Vedeker is recused. Derek Belton, I approve based on comments. Dwayne Bear.
Approve.
William Kropa.
I decline.
Jim Schmidt.
I approve. I think it's needed for them to continue on their project.
Motion carried, 5-1. The so long-waited item number 4, are there any off-agenda items? Seeing none? Does anybody have any other business? I will entertain motions for adjournment. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Moved by Dwayne, seconded by